Hello everyone and welcome back to yet another Noot holiday special. Sorry for using the irrelevant YouTuber costume from last year, but this AdSense money only pays for so much. Last year we ranked every single episode of the iconic horror animated show, Courage the Cowardly Dog, a show that was the first introduction to a lot of children to the genre of horror. So this year, I thought I'd look back at a series that played the same role for many kids, not only in television, but in book form. Goosebumps was a pretty big part of my childhood. Even if I wasn't even alive when the books and TV series had their first run, I had some of the books, I spent a good amount of time watching the TV show when I was younger, and there was a period where it was definitely my go-to when browsing through the school library and our Scholastic book fairs. First published by Scholastic in 1992, Goosebumps is the beloved creation of its author R.L. Stine. But when it came to horror, this wasn't R.L.'s first rodeo, as he's been writing horror since at least 1986 and appears to still be on that grind to this day at the ripe old age of 80 years old. Goosebumps is fondly remembered as a series that allowed kids to dip into the horror genre without getting too spooked, with its readers pulled in by the wonderfully illustrated covers by Tim Jacobus. I'm sorry, man. Great covers, though. These covers alone were enough to get my interest most of the time, and I can't lie, there were a good few in particular that scared the shit out of me just from the covers alone. With the series' success in the early 90s, it would also be given its own TV show, first releasing in 1995 and running for 4 seasons till 1998 on Fox Kids. And this is what I plan to review today. 4 seasons, approximately 74 episodes crammed into one video. So, how are we going to do this? Well, I thought I'd mix it up from last year and instead go with a simple number ranking as opposed to trying to arbitrarily put one episode over another when my feelings about them are fairly similar. So this will work as a classic 1 to 10 scale, but these scores will be exclusively compared to other episodes within the series. You know, a 10 here does not mean it's peak television or anything. This isn't Breaking Bad, this isn't The Sopranos or anything like that. That being said, I am one idiot whose opinion only matters because you're currently watching this video. Your opinions will differ, and overall this series is fairly consistent. A lot of the same plot structuring, lots of bad child acting in particular, and above all else is for children, which I am not. I am not going to be pulling too many punches here. Some of these episodes suck ass, and some of these are decently good enough. And when I can't decide on how I feel about an episode, I will be nitpicking random bullshit or using my own bias frequently, because that is what I do best. So with all that in mind, let's crack into this video, because it's gonna be a while, folks, so sit back, relax, and enjoy the shit show of me struggling to get this video out within a month. I hope you all enjoy.
He wears a mask just to cover the raw flesh, a rather ugly brother with flows that scourge.
The first episode in the first dual-part episode in the Goosebumps series. In this episode, we follow Carly Beth.
Carly Beth. Carly Beth.
Carly Beth.
Carly Beth. Carly Beth.
Carly Beth. Carly Beth.
Carly Beth.
Carly Beth.
Carly Beth.
A name the show does not seem to want you to forget, who just so happens to be a little bit of a little sissy who gets scared of almost anything. The show tries to make us feel bad for her, but honestly, if some random girl at school is screaming at the top of her lungs every few seconds over a gust of wind, I'm gonna be honest, I'd hate that girl too. That sounds annoying as hell. Now, the plot of this episode involves some schoolboys scaring her over and over again around the Halloween season, and although her very crafty mom makes her a super epic duck costume, she wants to be something scary for once, so goes into the back room of this old antique shop and finds masks in this dude's like secret villain lair that are actually alive. After arguing with the guy for a bit and even doing a little bit of beatboxing,
Carly Beth.
she takes one of the masks and, wouldn't you know it, the haunted masks are haunted. After putting it on, she starts going goblin mode to everyone around her, just being a straight up weirdo, growling and just kind of being an asshole to people. And later in the night, after trick-or-treating with her friend for a bit, she ditches her, going full goblin mode at this point to go scare her schoolboys who are just about as freaked out as everyone else, and also somehow confused on how she's making her voice sound like this, which...
How are you making that weird voice?
Apologize to her.
I don't think this is that hard to pull off. Anyways, her spirit possesses like the head sculpture of herself that her mom made and goes help, help, help before the mask version of her goes goblin mode yet again and buries the fake head of Carly Beth. After running off to commit more acts of terror, Carly Beth is snapped back to reality by her friend, and when they both go home, they realize she cannot get the mask off. Carly Beth starts freaking out, her friends start freaking out, things are going great, and so she decides to run back to the store she got the mask from, where the evil guy goes on some expedition dump about not being able to remove the masks and them being his past faces that were corrupted by his self-hatred, and then he's interrupted because, oh shit, the masks are using early 2000s low-budget special effects. It does not get more terrifying than this. So they start chasing Carly Beth down, and as she flees to the spot where she buried the fake version of her head, she whips that thing out on those ghosts, who all fly away, presumably because they think she is terrifyingly ugly. But because she was able to learn to appreciate her face, she was able to remove the mask because it's defeated by self-love or something. And then she goes home happily ever after, and oh wait, her brother puts on the mask and roll credits. Also at the end here, we get an absolute banger from my good old pal RL at the end.
Now that wasn't too scary, was it? Let's ask my family. Mom? Dad? What did you think? I think they liked it.
All in all, this episode was pretty alright. It had some very goofy moments for sure, but I think was pretty entertaining enough, and honestly, the ending was pretty good. I feel this is a pretty iconic aspect of the Goosebumps franchise, but the episode itself was only kind of alright, so I'm gonna give this one a, let's go with a 6.5 out of 10.
Tick tock, tick tock. 60 seconds got to get.
I can't lie, when I first read the name of this one, I thought this episode was going to be kind of boring, but I was happily surprised. The plot essentially revolves around this kid named Michael, which, hey, that's my name. But yeah, little me has a shithead sister who keeps fucking up his life and embarrassing him in front of his friends, and then out of nowhere, their dad brings out a magical cuckoo clock that he says not to touch. But Michael hatches a little scheme to break the cuckoo clock and frame his sister, but when he goes to do it, he gets hit with like this Groundhog Day treatment and starts reliving his birthday. And at this point, I was like, alright, I've seen Groundhog Day, that's great and all, but I don't think Goosebumps will do it better. But no, I was wrong. Plot twist, he wakes up the next day and he's aging backwards. This time he's 6 years old and he's freaking out because soon enough time will go backwards to the point where he won't exist. So he starts frantically trying to go back to the cuckoo clock, which is currently sitting at the antique store, to try and break it to send him back to the present. But obviously he's like a child, so you wouldn't just let a kid wander around into an antique store alone, so he's found by his parents sounding kind of delirious, trying to explain the situation, and is forced to go home treated like a child, just making up a story. And then the next day when he wakes up as a 12-year-old boy trapped in a body of an infant, by some miracle he is able to get back to the cuckoo clock again in this antique store, which sends him back to the present, but this time his sister does not exist. Pretty nutty twist at the end. He's kind of happy about it because she was a shitty sister, but she was also like 5 years old, so I don't know about that one. But yeah, a great episode, to be honest. Was not expecting to enjoy it as much as I did. There's a lot of tension going on throughout. He is quite literally working against the clock to try to resolve this situation, which is pretty terrifying to be in. So I'm going to give this one a solid 9 out of 10.
Everybody know I'm a motherfucking monster. I'ma need to see.
This episode focuses on a girl who keeps pranking her brother by telling him she keeps seeing like spooky monsters everywhere, and he falls for it every time. What a gullible fucking idiot. Eventually, after like some just talking and stuff, we cut to her just chilling at the library, eventually leaving but doubling back as she forgets something, only to come back and see that the librarian is eating bugs and shit, and oh no, he's a green slug man. But because she keeps pulling the good old, boy who cried wolf routine, no one believes her, which I'm going to be honest, I wouldn't believe her even if she hadn't done that shit 50 times already. But either way, it's not a good look for her. So to have people believe her, she goes back to try to get photo proof, but oh no, she is caught and chased down. And later on, this librarian slugman shows up to her house to return something she left behind, and her parents invite him over for dinner later, and then, He shows up for dinner and the girl's parents eat the other dude out of nowhere. It turns out they're monsters and they felt like he was like on their territory or something. I don't know, kind of weird. It's pretty unexpected ending, I'm not gonna lie, but in a goofy kind of good way. That being said, this episode isn't all that interesting outside of that twist at the end, and for the series is overall pretty forgettable. I don't know, I'm gonna give this one a 5 out of 10. It's pretty average.
See me here at the summer camp. You know you could swim and jump off the boat ramp.
This one kind of feels like R.L. Stein's take on like maybe the first Friday the 13th movie, but Maybe I'm just saying that because it's like a summer camp. So there's a group of kids who go to a summer camp, but when they get there, strange stuff starts happening. The bus driver peels off and leaves all of their stuff. There's a creature in the woods called Saber, who's like a hyper-aggressive, weird werewolf-looking thing. The camp counselors there are all a bit off, and one by one, our boy Billy, the main character, has his friends picked off mysteriously, while the camp counselors keep gaslighting him into believing nothing is happening and that the other campers that disappeared never even existed. This all culminates into a final argument with our protagonist and the main camp counselor, where the main camp guy named Uncle Al gets shot by a dart gun, only to have Billy's parents come out of nowhere to reveal it was all like this elaborate government test for Billy to prepare him for a dangerous expedition with them, and that he showed enough courage and strength to be able to handle this expedition. But where is this expedition to exactly? Earth. Fun little plot twist at the end. The mystery and constant tension this episode had kept it very engaging. Great pacing, and overall a great episode. I'm going to give this one a 9 out of 10.
Oh, please come back to me.
This episode takes place in a school where a group of kids are doing a play for Phantom of the Opera. Title probably gave that one away, but yeah, they're doing this play, and randomly after school hours, they find like a secret trap door thing that leads them to an area under the school where they find like a scary dude who essentially tells them like, hey, fuck off, I live here. And then afterwards, the main character girl, Brooke, I think is her name. She's also referred to as Esmeralda because that's like the character she plays in the play. But she starts getting like stalked and given weird messages. Then randomly on set one day, there's like a new kid who shows up to the play to help out, and then all the girls kind of start fawning over him and trying to get his attention. But when they start practicing that day, doing a rendition of the play, the main character girl almost gets crushed by a door that falls down from the ceiling with a message written on it saying that Esmeralda needs to stay away, or essentially Brooke in this case. This door message also comes with a very convenient path of paint that leads directly to Zeke, the guy who plays the Phantom's locker, and everyone gets him out of him, but Brooke on the other hand goes, no, it couldn't be him, we have to confront the creepy guy in the basement from earlier to clear his name. So Brooke, Zeke, and the new kid that shows up to help out all go down to the basement, and then there's a creepy chase scene, but thankfully the teachers find them, and the cops show up, and they're just like, yeah, don't worry guys, that was just a homeless dude. But we've taken care of it. He's going to freeze to death outside, but you're safe. You're welcome. Finally, near the end of the episode, when we think we have everything wrapped up, they're doing the play, and then the kid who plays the Phantom secretly gets snatched and swapped out for another mysterious Phantom. And plot twist, he was actually the new kid, who was a ghost or something, who'd been wanting to star as the Phantom in the play since like 70 years ago or something. I don't know, this episode kind of sucks. No hate, RL, but this episode is just so boring. It feels like almost nothing really happens, and everything that's supposed to be scary ends up being something super mundane. And besides the twist at the end, which doesn't even make sense. Like, who the fuck would care enough about wanting to play the Phantom in the Phantom of the Opera for 75 years after their death? Instead of committing to that, maybe commit yourself to some paper, bro. The one positive I can give is that the child actors in here are a bit above average, but still this one is not one of my favorites. 2 out of 10.
Ooh, baby.
Our episode opens up here with a kid moving into a new house on the block, but when they're moving in,
Jerry
here's a piano, and when he goes to investigate, gasp, it's playing by itself. He tells his dad about it, who doesn't really believe him or honestly care. His parents think that he might want to take piano lessons because of this for some reason, and he's not really about it until he talks to a new neighbor girl, and she's into it, so he gets into piano and ends up taking lessons at a music school. Everyone at the school there, which is pretty much like 2 people, really love his hands for some reason. One night, the piano ghost lady that like haunts his piano in his home wakes him up and tries to warn him to stay away from that
school,
but his parents force him to go back. But this time when he goes back, his teacher freaks out at him and starts chasing him around the place, saying he wants to have his hands. And while he's running, he runs into the mechanic janitor guy for the building, who saves him by turning the teacher off, who is apparently his creation. But gasp again, he's actually the villain and wants the little boy hands to play piano for his self-playing pianos, when out of nowhere, for the 9th round knockout, Ghost Piano Lady comes in to save the day and ridicules the guy for being a lazy bitch and never practicing piano himself, damning him to an endless piano practicing purgatory. This episode was a bit more entertaining than I expected. The main character kid is such a dork, though. I didn't really bring it up, but he talks to himself throughout pretty much the entire episode, which is kind of annoying but also funny in like an awkward way. Overall, though, this episode was fairly mediocre. I don't know, I'll give this a 5.5 out of 10. It had a decent twist, I guess.
I'm controller of planet X.
Alright, Return of the Mummy. This episode is actually the first episode in the series to take place outside of North America, I think, as our protagonist is visiting his family in Egypt, buying a fake little mummy hand charm in the airport, which is something that is commonly sold there, I guess. While he's visiting his uncle discovers an ancient pyramid, and so they go to explore it, and oh no, the hand charm starts moving around on its own, so it's actually alive or cursed or something like that. After our protagonist gets lost and subsequently found in the labyrinthian halls of the pyramid, our protagonist and his family are greeted by some random woman who is curious of the tomb and wants to see it as well. So she decides to accompany the family into the tomb when, oh no, the kids get separated from the adults by activating like a secret compartment, which puts them into the room with the mummy, who starts chasing them around. But don't worry, the random lady is here to save the day, and with a twist that has never happened before in Goosebumps history, someone you thought was good is actually bad. She's apparently like the mummy's sister, and let me say, she's aged pretty well. But she starts bossing her brother around, which makes the mummy mad, and so he breaks her amber amulet, causing her to explode into light while the kids and the uncle escape the mummy as the pyramid falls apart. But at the end, while the protagonist is packing to leave, the little hand charm climbs into a suitcase to follow him home. This episode is alright, nothing crazy here, but a lot of moments that are unintentionally very funny. These bump it up for me maybe like a little bit, so I'm gonna give this one a 6 out of 10. Pretty sure I was scared of this episode a lot as a kid.
But let me tell you one thing, I'm not
I had to spend a little time here making sure I didn't miss an episode, but looks like we're just skipping over 1 and going straight to 2. Now, if you know Goosebumps, you know Slappy the Dummy, or at least have seen him. He's a fairly iconic part of the franchise, so this one had some fairly high expectations for me. In this installment, Slappy is making his first on-screen appearance as a family hosts like a talent show or something. I'm not really sure what's going on here. Is this like a normal family activity? I don't know, I'm an only child. I never did this, but anyways. Girl goes to do her little performance for her family with her ventriloquist dummy when his head pops off, and she complains that, Dad, this dummy is so old and shitty, I want a new one. But Dad is like, hey, I got you a new one, and he gives her Slappy the Dummy, who proceeds to do what he does best, which is being an asshole to pretty much everyone. This makes everyone around his new owner believe that she's doing it because the dummy wouldn't actually be alive or anything, right? But everyone else eventually finds out the Slappy is actually alive, as after the girl throws Slappy away, he comes back to the family's home with a vengeance and starts chasing the kids around when suddenly his head smacks open, and the big reveal is that the previous broken dummy the little girl placed is actually alive and straight up killed Slappy. Overall, this episode is a classic, albeit a bit predictable, as an older viewer of a children's show. That being said, Slappy is a fairly entertaining villain, so despite some other mediocre parts of this episode, I'm gonna give this one a 7 out of 10.
This time, I was growing my hair, but I never considered trying.
This adventure stars Larry, sometimes called Hairy Larry, who runs from dogs because they seem scary. During a jam session with the boys in an abandoned house, one of them finds tanning lotion, and so they all decide to put it on because, what else do you do when you find tanning lotion? That night, Larry becomes hairy and blames it on the tanning lotion, and when seeing if this happened to any of his other pals, he and his friend find out that one of their buddies has moved out overnight, and they can't seem to find the other. The next night, Larry gets invited over for dinner with his last remaining friend, and then realizes that he has even more hair at dinner. So he kind of freaks out and leaves out the bathroom window, pulling a classic bad first date maneuver. When he gets home, he's straight up fucking covered in hair, so his parents call a doctor who attributes the hair to stress, as you do. The next day, he wakes up with like a new hair that he had grown gone, but while out and about, he finds a dog that resembles his friend Lily, I think is her name, but she's the one he had dinner with the previous night before. So because of this, he goes to visit her parents, who are mysteriously moving out and don't even acknowledge that they ever even had a daughter. He also finds another one of his friends that has been turned into a dog, and wouldn't you know it, Hairy Larry also eventually turns into a dog himself, where we get a giant exposition dump in 2 seconds that explains that all of his friends were originally dogs that got turned into humans somehow by the doctor. The parents were in on it, which is why they moved out, I guess. Also, Larry's cat from other parts of the show gets turned into a human by the doctor at the end. I don't know. It doesn't really make that much sense. It's not a scary episode. The plot is terribly explained and it kind of just shoved in at the end. Also, I didn't mention this, but the audio is pretty fucked up, especially with like the voice lines for the main characters, including the main character Larry, as it sounds like almost all of his lines are dubbed over. Maybe I'm just hearing things, I don't know. But either way, I did not like this episode. I'm gonna give it a 1 out of 10.
Got that, oh, oh.
We've got another two-parter episode, this time focusing on a family of 4 featuring their 2 kids, their scientist dad, and mom, who's in the episode for like 2 seconds before going to visit their aunt in the hospital. While their mom is away, the dad tells the kids to stay out of the basement as to not interfere with his work, and of course, they break this rule almost immediately and discover what is essentially a jungle down there, as the entire basement is overgrown with plants. Over the course of the episode, the dad starts acting a little bit strange, a bit angrier, eating plant food, kidnapping a scientist guy who shows up, just being a general weirdo, and big props to this guy as I think he plays the role very well. This all eventually culminates in the kids breaking into the basement for the final time while he's away, discovering that now they're finding like human plant hybrids in the basement, as well as finding like their dad. But at the moment that they find their dad, their other dad walks in, and you know, there's like this face-off between the two, and the kids have like this weed killer ready to spray the fake plant imposter dad, whichever one that might be, which, you know, I don't know. At this point, I think it's pretty obvious which is which, but to help with the confusion, the real dad calls his daughter Princess, which is like her nickname, signaling that he is the real dad. The daughter then sprays the fake plant dad, and he melts into oblivion and happily ever after. Except, the plants in the garden are all now saying they're her dad, meaning whatever the experiment that her dad was working on must have spread to the other plants around the house. Overall, this episode is pretty good. A lot of the longer form episodes do have the benefit of being able to slowly build tension and flesh out the stories more, and these episodes definitely do that. While I don't think it's like the greatest two-parter or anything, I think it's pretty good. I'm gonna give this an 8.5 out of 10.
All right, you invertebrates, I'm gonna teach you how to do the sponge.
Like a lot of episodes, this one starts off with a family moving into a new home. While moving in, our protagonist finds a weird sponge creature under the sink, and of course her family does not believe this thing is real, which is a very common theme throughout most episodes. After finding this sponge, our main protagonist seems to start having really bad luck, and this SpongeBob creature keeps showing up out of nowhere to torment her, including starting to mess with her brother and his friend. To get rid of it, the kids decide to bury the sponge, but the next morning, they check on the sponge, and it seems to have killed all of the plants around it, so they decide to dig it up, and to figure out how to stop it, they drop it off at the school to give their science teacher, who tells them, like all the other adults in this episode, that it's just a sponge, but she says she'll give it another look tomorrow. That night, her brother's friend, though, somehow miraculously finds this creature in a book and tells her that it's called a gunk, which is it's a sponge creature that causes bad luck, and if it's given away by its owner will die. For this reason, the kids break back into the school to go and get it, but try to hide from the janitor who's cleaning the school there. After the janitor accidentally knocks himself out, the gunk starts trying to move towards them, but the happy music playing on the janitor's headphones causes it to shrink, so the kids somehow figure out that it needs positive energy to shrink and negative energy to grow. So they start complimenting it until it gets really small and is finished off by the janitor with a fire extinguisher. At the end of this episode, it shows that the gunk is now forced to be this girl's pet, and so she now plays happy music 24/7 to keep it contained. But right at the end, she's given a new creature to worry about, a potato with teeth. This episode is alright. It's a bit more entertaining than I initially expected, at least, based on the concept, and obviously had a message for children to be kind or whatever, but it's still pretty mediocre. So I'm gonna give this one a 4 out of 10. We've definitely had worse though.
Shake it, shake it like a Polaroid picture.
Right off the bat, you know this episode is about to be a banger, as it stars our boy Ryan Gosling as a young man who's friends with these two folks here as they look to break into the building of a man called Spider, or at least that's the nickname they give him. Upon breaking in, they find a camera, and Ryan Gosling decides to take a picture of one of his friends right before he falls from a catwalk of the building. Thankfully, his friend is fine, but looking at the picture, it shows his friend falling, so Ryan Gosling is understandably weirded out by this as he took the picture before this happened. When he gets home, Ryan Gosling's brother asks for a picture with their dad's new car, but when it's developed, Ryan notices that the car is totaled and that the picture is understandably concerning, so he hides the picture from his brother. The following day, his dad gets in a pretty bad car accident, like the picture kind of telegraphed, but this isn't before he's pressured into taking a picture of his other friend, who's nowhere to be found in the picture. And hours later, police come to his house asking if he knows where she's gone, as she's gone missing. The next day, Ryan meets up with his other friend to discuss their missing friend and his frustration with the camera, causing Ryan to rip up the photo of his missing friend and throw the camera to no effect, as the camera seems indestructible. This is when Ryan decided he had to take the camera back to Spider, and on the way, he runs into his missing friend who says she randomly appeared back again in her backyard, seemingly right as Ryan ripped up the photo, meaning there seems to be a method to countering the future predicted by the camera. When they go to return the camera, Spider tells them that he made the camera and he had hoped to hide it there, and for that reason, he can't let them leave without without it, I guess. Doesn't make too much sense, but thankfully they're able to stop Spider by taking a picture of him, which somehow traps him in the camera. Later on though, some bullies from earlier in the episode find the camera in the abandoned building, taking a photo and re-releasing Spider for a bit of a cliffhanger. This episode is pretty good, interesting concept, and was one of my favorite books as a kid. The acting here is also pretty solid, which gives the score a bit of a bump here, and although this episode isn't super scary and has some dumb moments like at the end, it's overall pretty solid, so I'm going to give this one an 8 out of 10. Our episode starts with two siblings taking a trip in England, and for some reason, they want to go to a castle's torture chamber for a fun little tour. While they're on the tour, they get lost and eventually chased down by this weird dude in a hat who follows them through the tunnels of the castle until they're eventually able to escape up through a manhole cover back to the streets of England. However, once they're back, things are a bit off as they can't really remember anything about themselves. Their parents seem to be missing, and they can't really get any sort of help. For a while, they just kind of chill in the hotel their parents are supposed to be staying in, thinking of what to do next before being chased down by the guy in the hat again, who teleports them back into medieval times, where it is revealed that these two children are actually royalty, and the man in the hat is their executioner sent to kill them in a grab for power. The kids both eventually get captured by the executioner despite their best efforts, and in their cell, they find a sorcerer that was loyal to their parents who had previously sent them to the future with false memories, hoping to save them from their execution. Right before the execution happens, a little scuffle ensues, and the young boy is able to steal back some magic rocks from the executioner, throwing them to the sorcerer, and bam, they're back in the 90s. And everything is as it should be until, oh no, the executioner guy is also back in the 90s, which, like, I know this is England, but just shoot this dude already. I just don't know what to tell you, man. If it's that easy to time travel back and forth, like, go to the 1800s, hit this dude with a musket, and no one will even fucking notice. Anyways, yeah, this episode is relatively solid. Obviously, the time travel stuff has some plot holes, but this is a work of fiction. If you care about scientific reasoning behind this stuff, you're a fucking loser, until it's something I care about, in which case, it is an unforgivable sin on the part of the writers. The plot is relatively interesting, though, and engaging throughout, so I'm going to give this one an 8 out of 10. Not a huge standout or anything, but it's a pretty solid episode. A family of 4 has moved down to a rundown piece of shit next to an area called Fever Swamp, a swamp named after its apparent ability to give people fevers that melt their brains. The house the family moves into is a mess, and after finding a snake in one of the drawers, the parents decide to do the most reasonable thing they can and tell their adolescent son to take the snake and release it back into the swamp, where he gets lost almost immediately before being found by a scary looking dude. Then bam, jump cut, he's just back home again now, I guess. Issue resolved. Although hating the place at first, the young protagonist Grady quickly becomes friends with a kid named Will and finds a dog he's able to convince his parents to let him keep. Will and Grady spend a lot of their time wandering around in the woods and find the creepy old dude again and again, and is told by Will that the guy is actually a werewolf. The protagonist kid becomes scared of this info as things keep showing up mauled to death around their house, and his parents instead decide to blame the new dog for this and attempt to get rid of him, forcing Grady to go into the swamp to confront the werewolf man as he knows he's responsible, although he seemingly entirely forgets about this motivation as he's captured, witnessing the creepy old man howl at the moon before he escapes back home. That night, the parents' research deer that they're studying escape through a mauled hole in the fence that they somehow blame on the dog again, and turns out, the werewolf is out on the prowl and is fucking shit up, with Will presumed dead as Grady can't seem to find him in his house. After lots of chasing and scary moments, the werewolf is eventually captured and escapes one of the old man's traps as he attempts to protect Grady. So, turns out he's actually not a werewolf, he's just acting weird earlier, I guess, and it is instead, the new neighbor friend Will. The werewolf man eventually falls into the bog of the swamp and drowns to death, so happily ever after, I guess, except oh no, Grady is howling at the moon at the end, so he might be a werewolf now too, I guess. I don't know. This episode was pretty solid. The first half was pretty boring though, I can't lie, so it loses a bit of points for me there, and there's also some like weird inconsistencies, like what the fuck is going on with this old guy? But I don't know, I'll give it a 6 out of 10. Could have been better, but I think it's still pretty good.
I wish I was a little bit taller. I wish I was a baller. I wish I had a girl who looked good, I would call her.
The first episode for Season 2 stars a girl named Samantha, as she embarrasses herself around school, almost incapable of doing anything you'd expect a normal functioning human to do, and for this reason is mocked for her clumsiness by pretty much everyone. Because of this, she bumps into a magic lady named Clarissa, who notices this like random gem Samantha found on the gym floor, and says that it's actually hers, but pretty much gives it right back to Samantha to use after she helps her go to a random part of town, which let me tell you, Kids, if you're watching this, do not do that. Do not just like guide a random person to a remote part of town. For helping her out, Clarissa gives her 3 wishes, the first in which she uses to become the best basketball player on her team, which doesn't make her any better, it just kind of makes everyone else on her team worse. The second she accidentally wishes for after she wished that everyone would just buzz off, which Clarissa apparently interpreted as wishing that everyone became flies. And the third wish is where she wished everything was back to normal, but that her bully thought the world of her, which essentially turns the bully into a stalker. Because the stalking is getting so bad, Clarissa shows up randomly and gives her another wish, and where she wishes that pretty much everything was reversed and says she wished that her bully found this amulet thing instead. This causes her bully to no longer be her stalker, and instead she gets this wish necklace and wishes that everyone admired her, which causes her to turn into a statue of herself, I guess. So, yeah, this episode was okay. It definitely seems like the standard genie 3 wishes sort of story, and besides the interesting part where everyone gets turned into flies, it's pretty boring and uneventful. Samantha's clumsiness, though, can be fairly entertaining sometimes, so it's not the worst, but I found it kind of boring. I'm gonna give it a 3 out of 10. This episode starts off with a young boy named Skipper, who's a big fan of comics, particularly of a comic called The Masked Mutant. Skipper, however, gets interrupted by his parents when he's reading, who want him to do his homework, a very common theme throughout this episode. After going to school, he hops onto the city bus where he runs into another girl who's around his age who's also into collecting comics, and he gets so deep into conversation that our boy Skipper misses his stop, landing in one of the most horrifying settings of the Goosebumps series, Detroit. Not actually, but while he's out just walking around unsupervised, he stumbles across a building that looks almost identical to the mutants' hideout from the comics, and honestly, he can't believe it. The next day, he goes back to confirm what he saw, but when he goes back to check on the mutant's lair, it's gone. The next morning, he's reading a new issue of The Masked Mutant, and it mentions that the mutant used an invisibility cloak on the lair, so he goes to check the previous spot where the mutant's hideout was, and out of nowhere, the girl from the bus pops up thinking he's stupid for even believing any of this, but Fax did not care about her feelings. It's bam, mutant lair right fucking there, and so they go in to investigate. Gotta give a big shout out to the green screen gear being used. It's a bit hard not to notice when it's used, but to be fair, there's also some pretty great sets you'll see throughout this episode. Anyways, when they walk in, Skipper gets hit with like this ray of something, and as they go further into the mutant's lair, Skipper discovers a stack of comics, and in these comics there's things appearing on the page of him in that exact moment, deeply confusing him and freaking him out a little bit. While he's freaked out by this, the bus girl comes in and jump scares him, and when he goes to show her the comics, they're gone. When Skipper gets home, he starts seeing things in like comic book vision, so he's tripping pretty hard here. But his dad walks in and gives him a new Masked Mutant comic that came in the mail, and it has him in it, as well as the superhero, the Galloping Gazelle, who calls for Skipper inside of the comic to come and save him from the mutant. When he gets back to the mutant's lair, he finds the Gazelle, who was played by Adam West, which is a pretty great cameo, I can't lie.
Untie me. We have to hurry.
Skipper frees him from his loosely tied restraints, and off they go to stop the Masked Mutant. So the pair go to like the mutant's control room or something, where Adam West sits down, and surprise, it is actually the mutant who's disguised as a chair. In response, Adam West starts spinning around repeatedly, which doesn't really do anything, and he just gives up and's like, man, I'm too old for this shit, and pieces out. So the Masked Mutant starts dancing around for a little while, saying, I'm gonna kill you, child, and then reveals, bam, he was the girl the entire time, and Skipper was actually hit with a laser that put him into a comic book when he walked inside of the lair. Not really sure how that works, but anyways, he's somehow able to convince the mutant to turn into a liquid by saying he's like Elastic Void or something, and if he turns into a liquid, it'll melt the rubber, but for whatever reason, the mutant can't turn back from a liquid into a solid state of matter, so he just kind of melts and dies, I guess. And then at the end, it's revealed that Skipper is actually Elastic Boy, because he's in a comic now, I guess, and is like super stretchy and stuff. So yeah, this episode, to be clear, is not very scary, but I think it's a pretty cheesy and fun take on the old, Adam West Batman show, and I think is fairly entertaining in its absurdity. Also, maybe I'm just stupid, but I genuinely did not see the plot twist of the mutant being a little girl coming. I don't know. But yeah, I'm not really sure if this would really classify as a Goosebumps episode, but I did find it enjoyable at the very least, so I'm gonna give this one a 7.5 out of 10.
I got the magic in me.
This episode stars Tim, a kid who is obsessed with being a magician, and so the episode starts off with him visiting a magic trick store, which although has a bunch of things he's interested in getting, he's too broke to afford any of them. Luckily, the shop owner is a pretty nice guy, so he gives him and his friend tickets to his favorite magician, Amazo. Unfortunately, the show is at 10 p.m. on a school night, so his friend can't really afford to sneak out, so Tim tries to sneak out and eventually ends up going with his little sister to the show, and gets called up to the stage where he hops in a box and is then forced to sit in a room for a few hours and miss the entire show. Obviously a bit annoyed, while he's leaving, he sees Amazo's dressing room, and although he can't see him, Amazo tells him to fuck off essentially, so the kid, rightfully pissed, decides to steal one of his cases of magic supplies. When he gets home, his sister starts messing with one of the disappearing curtains and actually ends up disappearing herself. The rabbit that is used in the shows starts speaking to Timothy at this time and saying he used to be a magician himself before Amazo turned him into a rabbit with a special real magic wand that the rabbit originally had. This wand is apparently the only thing that can bring back Tim's sister, so he and the rabbit go down there to get the magic wand, which will also help turn the rabbit guy back into just, a guy. And surprise, Amazo shows up and is like, hey, I didn't even lock you in that room, why are you mad at me? But turns out the rabbit guy is a very evil magician, and now he has the wand, so he turns Amazo and Tim into rabbits to be used and possibly decapitated in a show that he has. And that's the end. Yeah, the storytelling in this one has a few holes in it, and I didn't really feel it had a very hugely compelling plot. The ending as well was pretty abrupt and pretty unsatisfying. I don't know, I'm not a big fan. I'm gonna give this one a 2.5 out of 10. One of the weaker episodes in the series so far.
And there will be ghosts.
The Headless Ghost features, as they describe themselves, to be the twins of terror. One boy, one girl, as they constantly fuck around in a haunted house tour, consistently ruining it for others. The first night, Discount Kelsey Grammer kicks them out of the house, and for some reason, the next night decides to let them back in, where they promptly sneak off to look into the sea captain's study, the original guy who lived there, and apparently haunts the place, before they are kicked out again for going into a restricted room. As they're leaving, a random kid walks up to them out of nowhere and says, hey, if you guys want to see some real ghosts, I'll sneak into the house later and show you. So the kid gives them a tour of some restricted rooms, telling them a story of a kid who died in like a dumbwaiter after trying to grab some strawberry ice cream that got stuck in there, falling down the chute, essentially obliterating his skull, which is not something I'd expect Goosebumps to throw in there, but props, I guess. Once they get into the attic, the boy reveals himself to be the Headless Ghost, Andrew, that a lot of the tour revolves around, except, oh wait, he's not actually the Headless Ghost, because the real Headless Ghost shows up, as well as Discount Kelsey Grammer again, who tells the kids to essentially fuck off and is like, hey, I told you that this place was haunted, but you didn't want to believe me. So he's like, okay, boy, you go ahead. I want to talk to the girl alone for constantly disrespecting the house. This is done because the sister is essentially the one who wanted to do all this stuff in the first place. So when the door closes to scold her, the tour guide reveals himself to be the sea captain ghost from the beginning of the episode. And the kid giving them the tour is actually the ice cream kid ghost. I just lied about it the first time. So anyways, Kelsey Grammer starts painting the girl to turn her into a ghost, I guess, which is interrupted when the boy walks in and throws a very conveniently placed open bucket of red paint on the canvas to stop her from turning into a ghost, and then gets chased out by Kelsey Grammer Ghost Man, and they're saved. At the end of the episode, it goes forward to the future where Frasier Ghostman is no longer giving tours, is instead selling the house to an old couple, hoping to possibly claim his next victim, I think. This episode is pretty alright. The plot is at least somewhat intriguing, and the tension is kept relatively high throughout, and although I did like this episode, I don't really feel like it does anything super special, and it has some like weird plot points that I don't really understand. So I'm going to give this one a 7 out of 10. It's still fairly good.
There's a worm in the ground, yes it is.
Go Eat Worms is an episode focused on worms. Big shocker. Things open up with our main character named Todd, who for some reason is obsessed with worms, and his best friend who are working on their science experiment for school, which is about how much like shit they can subject worms to and have them still be alive, which is some real psycho shit, I can't lie. Todd's sister goes downstairs to see what her brother is doing and also to show off her science project of a robin's life cycle or something like that. And she had made this like robin sculpture out of like paper mache, but when she opens like the robin's mouth, a bunch of worms spill out of its mouth that Todd put in there to prank his sister because he's an asshole, I guess. As this is unfolding, we also get like a point of view shot of the worms' vision, I guess, showing that they're intelligent enough to be plotting something against Todd for torturing them. At school, Todd switches lunches with his friend, but when his friend takes a bite out of Todd's spaghetti, he realizes it's filled with worms and assumes he deliberately pranked him. Back at Todd's house, we get a glimpse of the worm room that he has, which is like some insane decorations, probably like the craziest shit we see in the series. In the middle of the night, while he's sleeping, the worms, I guess, work together to like move up through the house and sneak into his room to prank him, I guess, but Todd is convinced that his sister did it to get back at him. The next night, to get back at his sister, he goes out to catch more worms, but somehow gets like sucked underground into a big worm tunnel or something, where the worms start attacking him, and as he tries to escape, an even bigger worm attacks him, but thankfully, his sister and her friend are also conveniently walking in the same remote part of the woods at night, right where he is, which like scares off the worm, I guess. When Todd finally gets home, he decides to clear all of the worm stuff out of his house, too traumatized to return to his old love, which is tragic. But don't worry, at the end of the episode, he has decided to move on to a new favorite animal to torture, the fish, which ends up like reeling him into the water with like a sandwich as bait. I'm not really sure what happened there, but anyways, it's a weird episode, and it's kind of similar to a lot of like the kids movies or kids stories about like kids torturing animals and then the animals get back at them, kind of like Ants, but with worms. There was nothing too terrible about this episode, I guess, but it's so weird. Also, it has like so many squishy noises throughout the episode that are just kind of nasty to listen to. Again, I'm a nitpicky asshole, but overall, there's not really too much interesting going on here. I'm just going to give this a solid 2 out of 10. It's just incredibly forgettable. You can't scare me? Oh, I beg to differ. Maybe I can't, but he can. So this episode, we open up on like a swamp with a grandpa and his granddaughter just like playing catch, which seems like a perfect place to do that. When oh no, grandpa gets pulled under by like a mud monster, and actually, it's just a visualization of a story this girl Courtney is presenting for her class or something. After she's done telling the story, she's kind of mocked for being like a know-it-all by the 2 kids at the back of the class who decide to like get back at her and like prank her by putting a snake into her lunchbox, which doesn't really work out since she actually likes snakes. Since the first prank didn't work out, they decide to try and steal the class tarantula instead, which backfires as the teacher, whose class it is, walks in and they're forced to hide in a closet before the spider breaks out and crawls all over them, causing them to freak out, and Courtney is able to calmly take it off of them without issue. The next day, Courtney's story from the beginning of this episode gets published in a newspaper, and she tells the teacher in front of the class that writing the story helped her confront her fear of mud monsters, which is an oddly specific fear, I guess, but all right. So with this info, the boys decide to launch their final plan of inviting her down to the creek to prank her as mud monsters by covering themselves in mud. But while they're down there, one of them gets attacked by an actual mud monster, and as he flees back to his buddy, the girl pulls up and is like, yo, fuck you for trying to prank me, you're a bunch of idiots. But while she's saying this, the actual mud monster pulls up behind her for the big reveal. And instead of being scared, she actually just lectures it and essentially bores it to death. We then flash forward like a little bit in time where like a bunch of news reporters have showed up to praise Courtney as the 2 boys are essentially embarrassed for trying to scare her with the mud monster. And as everyone else leaves, the monster wakes up and finally scares the boys one last time at the end. Overall, this episode wasn't super scary or anything, but it was at very least kind of funny as they're trying to constantly prank this girl. I don't know, I'm gonna give this one a 6 out of 10. I think it was pretty okay.
About a little man, if I can, a no-name.
This episode starts off with 2 kids playing in their front yard when the sister throws a ball over into her neighbor's yard, and when her brother goes to grab the ball, the neighbor, an ex-military officer, comes to steal the ball and just generally be an asshole. A little bit later, their dad pulls up in their garage to show off some new freakishly large garden gnomes that he got, and once they've put them out in the yard, the asshole neighbor goes over to say, yo, these look ugly as shit, and my lawn will win the annual garden off, which is apparently a type of competition that exists. In the middle of the night, though, the military man's melons are destroyed, so he goes over to his neighbor's house to flip shit and blame it on the guy's son. Coincidentally, as the 2 kids are checking out some of the garden gnomes, the brother notices black ink on one of the garden gnome's hands, which he thinks might have been used to draw faces on the neighbor's melons the previous night. Curious about what's going on, he sneaks out in the middle of the night and finds the gnomes destroying the neighbor's stuff, and when the neighbor wakes up and sees what's happening, the gnomes become still, making it look like the kid did it. As punishment for doing this, the dad of the family forces the kid to go over and fix the guy's lawn. That next night, to get proof it was the gnomes and not him, he sets an alarm and tries to get like some photographs and his parents' attention, but they decide to brush him off, so he instead grabs his sister to show her the gnomes. When they're out on the prowl for the gnomes, they are attacked by a big gang of gnomes who chase them into the asshole neighbor's lawn again, and not wanting to be caught, the kids immediately run away, and when they do, the gnomes instead attack the asshole neighbor. And the next day, as the garden competition judges go to inspect the dad's lawn, they're like, well, we almost were going to give you a perfect score until we found this ugly gnome, and they eventually reveal to be a gnomified version of the neighbor. Overall, I like this episode. It was kind of a bit absurd, and it follows a fairly standard Goosebumps format we've seen on a lot of episodes before, so I don't think it does anything super special, but I did enjoy it, so I'm going to give this one a 6 out of 10. You know, it's a bit above average. This episode features 2 young siblings going to visit some of their older relatives, and to make things extra spooky, we open up with a scene of a graveyard, as a little sister of the 2, Terry, does wax rubbings, I guess, which I didn't really know were a thing, but Cool hobby, I guess. While she's doing it, she finds out that the person on the headstone, Harrison Sadler, has the same last name as them, so pretty wild coincidence. While the siblings are reading the tombstone though, they get scared by another pair of siblings who also seem to have the last name of Sadler, who warn them of the ghost of Harrison Sadler who haunts the cave at the beach. When they finally get to their relative's house, they don't use electricity for some reason, I guess, and when asked about the old cave that the kids mentioned, the grandparents get really weirded out and leave dinner early. The next day, the kids are exploring the beach when they find the skeleton of a dog at the beach that apparently had been eaten, according to the other random Sadler kids, saying it was eaten by Harrison Sadler because ghosts are detected by dogs and they also eat them, I guess, for that reason. At dinner later on, they talk with their relatives again about the ghosts and like a light that they saw in the cave earlier, and Gramps says like, oh, don't worry about that, it's just Aurora Borealis. At this time of year, at this time of day, in this part of the country, localized entirely within the cliffside cave? Yeah, unlikely story, Grandpa. That night, the kids sneak out to see Aurora Borealis in the cave, and they instead find the light is caused by a torch. And living in the cave is an old man named Harrison Sadler, but not the same Harrison Sadler as the dead one. And although the guy acts a little bit weird, he insists that he isn't a ghost, and instead the random kids they ran into are the ghosts, and commands the siblings to go check the graveyard to see the headstones, and wouldn't you know it, the dead siblings' headstones are there. And at the same time that they're there, the random kids from earlier show up and gaslight them into thinking that they aren't the ghosts, and instead the other guy's a ghost, eventually showing them newly placed gravestones for both Jerry and Terry, saying that Harrison wants to kill them and instead should trap Harrison in the cave so he can't leave. But plot twist again. As our main character siblings go to close the cave entrance to Harrison's cave, a Harrison guy shows up and then calls a dog on them, as apparently they can detect ghosts, and yeah, the kids are the actual ghosts. And so I guess Harrison uses his secret electrical powers to use a lightning bolt to strike the boulder in front of the cave down, sealing the kids in. After our two main character kids go back to their relative's house to try to get some sleep, in the middle of the night, a dog starts barking at their grandparents, and wouldn't you know it, they're also ghosts. Yeah, this episode was pretty wild for one of the shorter ones. I think despite all the goofy acting and kind of obvious plot points, the episode is pretty solid and manages to pack a lot of interest in a short amount of time. Definitely not perfect, but I'm gonna give this one a 7.5 out of 10.
This is Halloween, this is Halloween, 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 Halloween.
Our episode starts off with two kids named Walker and Drew walking down the street when, bam, they get jump scared by two of Drew's old friends, and then bam, they're jump scared again by Walker and Drew's bullies. To get revenge on the bullies, Drew and her old friends plan to prank the bullies tomorrow on Halloween when they go trick-or-treating together. Before Drew and Walker go out, they get stopped by their parents who warn them to be careful because of recent kidnappings that have been going on in the area. While Drew, Walker, and the asshole kids are out trick-or-treating, they get jump scared by some dudes wearing pumpkin heads. Thinking they're Drew's old friends, they follow the pumpkin people to another neighborhood that gives out way more candy, but the residents all seem to be these pumpkin people as well, disguised as humans. When the group decides they want to stop trick-or-treating, they get stopped by the pumpkin people who want them to trick-or-treat forever. Then the pumpkin people start chasing the kids off into the woods, scaring the bullies off, and once they're gone, the pumpkin people transform back into Drew's old friends and reveal themselves to be aliens, which Drew knew about, I guess, the whole time, but also they reveal that they eat humans, so they're responsible for the recent disappearances, which Drew did not know about, I guess. So, not the best friends to have, I guess. Overall, this episode was fairly solid up until the end with that kind of absurd twist, which didn't really make much sense given that Drew was worried about her friends not showing up to like trick or treat, but she also knew that they were the aliens the whole time. I don't know. Like a lot of episodes though, I don't think anything here was done super well, besides there's like a nightmare scene where there's a bunch of kids like chained up in some old people's attic, which was pretty scary, but it just ended up being a dream sequence, so yeah, not really relevant to the overall plot. It does have some nice sets though, you know, probably a good episode to watch around Halloween, but because of its flaws, I'm gonna give this one a 4.5 out of 10. It's a small step below average.
Head on straight, mask on crooked, exit stage left with the cash gone took it.
Guess who's back, baby? It's Carly motherfucking Beth. Back with her friend from the first episode and also carrying around the same weird-ass fake head of herself for some reason, I guess. While Carly, Beth, and her friend are walking down the street, they're tempted to be scared by their bullies from the last episode to little success. Fun fact this time around, the bully Steve is played by the main kid from the Cuckoo Clock of Doom episode, so kinda neat, I guess. Now this episode apparently takes place a year after the first episode, with Halloween night right around the corner yet again. Carly Beth, when telling her friends about the incident from last year, says she buried the mask where no one will ever find it, but she was wrong as we cut to the mask CGI floating itself out of the ground and flying away back to the shop from the first movie, as the shop owner is burning the other masks, but is caught in the act by the OG mask who attacks and plops himself onto the man's face. The next day, the masked man shows up at the kids' school, leading the bully kids into the mask shop where one of the kids, Steve, steals one of the Halloween masks. The next day on Halloween, Steve puts on the mask, and like the last Haunted Mask episode, Bro starts going apeshit as Carly Beth and her friends try to track him down as the mask slowly starts turning him into a frail old man. Eventually, Steve is approached by the old shop owner possessed by the original mask, who asks Old Man Steve for the weird He-Man-like replica of Carly Beth's head, and in exchange, he'll help him get the mask off. So Steve goes to Carly Beth's house to steal the He-Man head, and once he's done, he's tracked down by the Haunted Mask Man, who says to smash it so that he can get to Carly Beth. But this time he is no longer promising to help Old Man Steve, who he eventually convinces to smash the head before capturing Carly Beth. The original mask tries to take over Carly Beth, but Steve throws her out of the way, saving her, and because of his act of love, he's able to take the mask off, and the original mask loses its power, I guess. At the end, they decide to calm down at Steve's house with Carly Beth and Steve throwing the masks into the fire, but before the original mask can be burnt, it pops out of the fire before Steve's dog shakes the shit out of it, burying it again for, I'm sure, another Haunted Mask episode in the future. Actually not, there's not another episode. The Haunted Mask 2 is definitely a step up from the first episode. You know, some better acting here. The mask here is also more interesting as it does more than just make the wearer an evil weirdo. The plot is also a lot more well thought out and engaging. It definitely has some of the same problems pretty much every Goosebumps episode has, but I think it is one of the best in the series. So I'm gonna give this bad boy a 9.5 out of 10. This episode starts off with two kids moving into a house, and oh my god, what is that dresser? But yeah, that dresser has a kid in it who pops out to scare them. Not sure why so many episodes just have kids jumping out of things or try to scare people. Is this like a really common occurrence in most social settings? Anyways, after knocking over a bunch of stuff in the apartment, they accidentally break a hole in the wall and discover a mirror with lights in front of it. And when you pull on that light switch, you disappear. Just a quick side note, what the fuck is this dialogue?
Max, you were gone.
Don't be stupid. That flashlight must have fried your eyeballs, that's all. Hey guys, wait up.
Like, what is happening? Anyways, the next day they decide to show their friends after using it the night before, and when the girl and guy use it this time, they start to not feel super well, and it starts to take a lot longer to reappear. This is until the older brother Max uses it, and then goes into a weird state in the mirror world where he has no body, and the mirror starts like glowing purple and stuff. But they are able to get Max back out, but this time when Max returns, he's extremely sick, so he tells everyone that they shouldn't use the mirror again. But his little brother really wants to go behind his brother's back to use the mirror, and is then turned entirely invisible, and then eats dinner with their family, which I guess his parents don't notice somehow. The older brother wants to hide this information for some reason, I guess, because maybe they'll get in trouble. I don't know. Max talks with the brother about not using the mirror anymore, and out of nowhere, his brother comes back, this time acting kind of odd, so Max starts hearing voices coming from the mirror and gets scared and runs out. The next day while Max is at baseball, his friends sneak up to use the mirror, and one of his friends, Zach, comes back from being invisible, incredibly hostile and obsessed with the mirror, forcing Max to use it and transporting him into this weird green screen world where there's a clone of himself, which is apparently like his evil reflection who wants to trade places with him. After this revelation, we get like a montage of a bunch of objects just kind of floating around while the kids in the real world are fighting Zach, as well as Max is fighting the clone of himself. And then Max is finally able to get out, and when he does, his friend is able to break the mirror and bring his friend back. But when they leave the room, the mirror starts to repair itself, and when throwing a cup to their father, Max's little brother Noah uses his right hand despite being left-handed, meaning that his brother is more than likely now the reflection. This episode on a surface level is pretty horrible, I'm not gonna lie, but from a comedic standpoint, this episode is very unintentionally funny, so often that it really elevates like a 1 out of 10 episode to at least like maybe a 3 or a 4 out of 10. So nice middle ground, I'll give this a 3.5 out of 10. So these two grandkids have come to visit their grandparents with their uncle, I think, for the summer. The grandparents and grandkids are talking about summer plans, including catching frogs and stuff, which I guess you just do that, when suddenly they're interrupted by their weird Uncle Stan, who says, like, he likes the frogs, and if you catch the frogs, the scarecrow might catch you. Probably one of my favorite openers at the bar right there. That night, there's a pretty heavy storm, and Grandma was worried that their scarecrow has breached containment, I guess, as she doesn't really see it in the field anymore, and her suspicions are soon confirmed as it tries to break into the house to little success as she has locked all the doors. At breakfast, there's some really weird tension about why there's no chocolate chip pancakes for some reason. I'm not really sure what that's about. And then the kids go outside to play catch. The young brother throws the ball too far into the field, and oh no, there's a scarecrow and creepy Uncle Stanley. Again, I'm really not sure what the familial relationship is with this guy, but anyways, he just keeps showing up here and says, hey, I made the scarecrow walk the other day, and the kids are rightfully like, Stanley, are you sure you do not have a neurological disorder? That night, things continue to be weird as Stan seems to be almost holding the grandparents hostage or something, and then the next night, things blow wide open when it's revealed that the scarecrows are in fact alive and start attacking the kids. Stan's kid reveals that his dad has like a spell book that he used to make the scarecrows come to life to help with the farm work, and now they've gone ballistic and have been terrorizing the farm. And then there's like a huge fight scene with the kids and Stan trapped in the barn, but luckily the little brother turns on a tractor and destroys all of the scarecrows, saving the day, I guess. Yay. Yeah, the plot of this one was all over the place. I'm not sure what is happening half the time, or at least why characters are doing what they're doing, especially Stanley, who just kind of does stuff because he's crazy, I guess. I'm not really sure. Very unfortunate, because this seems like a cool concept for an episode, but it's just executed very poorly in my opinion. Gonna have to give this one a 1 out of 10.
Lot of blood to let, peace to make, fucking say.
Our episode features a kid named Evan as he's forced to stay with his weird great aunt Catherine as his parents look around for a new home. Great aunt Catherine is severely allergic to animals, so upon getting there, Evan is forced to tie his dog up in the backyard, and when he walks into the house, Catherine freaks out and is like, "Don't go into the room across from your room," and so he obviously decides to immediately do this and then gets caught, where she promptly flips out again before having to like force one of the dressers closed as something tries to break out. The next day, some girl runs into Evan and they immediately become friends and start hanging out before breaking into the forbidden room, finding a bunch of spell books and a jar labeled monster blood, which upon opening lets out a black cat for some reason. The kids decide to take some of the monster blood and start playing with it, obviously, as it's a very bouncy, and when playing with it, they accidentally let the dog eat it. The next day, the goo has multiplied to like 50 times its size now, so the kids try to put it back, as Grandma is hitting the yoinky sploinky. While they're trying to get rid of it, Catherine has to like hit the drugstore as her allergies have flared up, so the kids rush to try to get rid of it, but when they go to check on the dog, which they decide to do for some reason, it somehow now affected him as he's gone and left behind a giant paw prints in the backyard. As they continue to try to contain it by dumping it into the bathtub for some reason, the Nickelodeon slime tries to eat Evan as he soon starts to become increasingly overwhelmed by the slime. It's then revealed that the cat is actually like an evil witch lady who keeps doing these weird mannerisms.
Maybe the first clue.
And then we get like a huge backstory about this evil witch lady and Catherine, who apparently have beefed for like 30 years or something like that, because the evil witch lady did some evil witchcraft, but was contained by the monster blood, but now controls the monster blood. I don't really understand the rules of how this stuff works. But the day is saved when the oversized dog pulls up on the house, scaring the evil lady back into the monster blood, which gets rid of the monster blood entirely, and also turns the dog back to normal. And then we finally get hit with a to be continued as monster blood is oozing out of a suitcase in a plane as Evan heads back to his family in Atlanta. So yeah, not really sure how to rank this episode, as instead of the usual part 2 added on to the end of the title, the next episode has a different title. So I guess I'll rank this as its own self-contained episode, as it has a bit more of a closed ending comparatively. Yeah, I don't know, I'm not a big fan of this episode. It does have a lot of moments that are very unintentionally goofy that make the episode, at the very least, kind of funny in some parts, despite the plot not really making all that much sense. I'm gonna give this one a 3.5 out of 10.
Can we pretend that airplanes in the night sky like shooting stars?
So yes, the follow-up episode, or technically part 2 to Monster Blood, more Monster Blood. This episode picks right back up where we left off in the previous episode, with Evan making friends with some of the kids from a school he might be going to. After making some incredibly well-written small talk, the Monster Blood slowly starts oozing its way from the plane's cargo hold. Things start disappearing, and people one by one slowly start getting eaten, as our main character kid Evan continues to rave about Monster Blood to the flight attendant, who warns him that doing this could land him on a no-fly list. But he's soon proven to be right, as Monster Blood coincidentally manages to eat everyone on this plane in a few seconds, besides the children and the pilot. As they struggle to figure out how to tackle the Monster Blood, they realize it's attracted to movement and that for some reason hates airplane food, which, I don't know, they don't really feed us any actual meals on planes anymore, but I do really enjoy like the little cookies they give out. So the kids hatch a plan to get on the other side of the plane to throw all of the airplane's food into the Monster Blood to kill it. And so the stereotypical nerdy kid crawls through the overhead compartment to get to the back of the plane, and then stares at it while one of the kids named Conan needlessly sacrifices himself before main character Evan and the nerd kid throw the airplane food into the Monster Blood, causing it to explode and everyone to be spit back up. After landing, some guy in a hazmat suit comes in to contain the Monster Blood, but when Evan goes to the back of the plane to grab his jacket, he finds a giant ant still infected by the Monster Blood. But like, Last time when we got rid of the monster blood, the dog turned back to normal. Why didn't the ant? This part of the monster blood saga is at least a bit more entertaining than the previous one, as the cast of characters is confined to an airplane, which is a fun idea we've seen replicated with like the critically acclaimed Snakes on a Plane. That being said, it's a lot of the same stuff. How the monster blood works doesn't really entirely make sense. The writing overall is still kind of iffy, but it's a bit better, I guess, so I'll give this one like a 4.5 out of 10.
Inside my mother's womb, doomed to return to the tomb. Or was it from the dead I was raised?
Vampire Breath stars two twin siblings, Freddy and Kara, whose birthday is tomorrow. Very exciting stuff. That night, their parents are stepping out, so while they're gone, these impatient children look around to see if they can find any of their birthday presents, and accidentally find a secret room behind a bookshelf in the basement with a coffin. Freaked out by this, they go to leave and find like a elixir bottle called Vampire Breath that pops open and rushes toward the coffin, awakening Count Nightwing, the Lord of the Undead, who is looking to feast on the two kids, but when he goes to eat them, he realizes he doesn't have his fangs and can't remember where they are, and to regain his full memories, he needs the rest of the vampire breath. So after making a deal, the kids and him search around, with Freddy finding it, hoping to find a way to escape the situation, and after a little monkey in the middle situation, both of the kids fall into a coffin, down a chute, into a cave full of a bunch of other coffins. While they're down there, they find a little girl who apparently cleans for the vampires, and while they're talking though, they can hear Count Nightwing coming to the room, so the kids hide, but are eventually found, and they all fight over the vampire breath, with the little girl eventually getting it, and revealing herself to also be a vampire. Before the little girl can drink the Count's vampire breath and steal all his powers, he snatches it back, getting his full power and memories back, turning her into a cockroach as the kids run upstairs to their parents, who I guess got home right at the same time. And then they reveal themselves to also be vampires, and that Count Nightwing is actually their grandfather. And as the clock strikes midnight and the kids officially become teenagers, they turn into vampires as well, because that's how vampire puberty works, I guess. And at the end, they finally get their gifts, which are bunk coffin beds. Not gonna lie, I thought I'd hate this episode, but I found it pretty enjoyable. It mixes in some scary elements as well as some goofy and lighthearted stuff, which I think fits really well into what Goosebumps should be doing for their child audience. So yeah, thought this one was kind of a banger. I'm gonna give this one an 8.5 out of 10. Not my favorite, but still very good. How to Kill a Monster stars two kids who recently have become step-siblings as they visit the stepsister Gretchen's grandparents. Upon getting there to their grandparents' house, things are pretty overgrown and the environment is a bit much for the younger stepbrother Clark. The grandparents greet the pair with a bowl of gumbo and some oddly ominous warnings about staying out of one of the rooms in the house, which just so happens to contain the carcass of some dead beast. Yeah, I'm not really sure what's up with all the Goosebumps stories with like secret off-limit rooms in every plot. I don't know, you feel like Arlo would at least try to mix it up a little bit. Anyways, they eventually both go into the room as the plot needs to progress, and when they do, the grandparents zoom out of there, leaving the kids behind as well as locking them in the house, as the once assumed to be dead monster starts chasing them around until it's led off a, for some reason, uncompleted staircase and is presumably dead, except, oh no, it's still alive, and so to kill it, they mix a bunch of spicy stuff into the gumbo and bait the monster into eating it, causing its mouth to start smoking, and is presumably dead for the third time, except, oh wait! It's not again, and then it chases them down the stairs as Clark boosts his stepsister up to a window to get out of the cellar before he bravely decides to stick his arm down the monster's throat. And then it's allergic to him, I guess, and dies this time for the final time as the Nickelodeon slime gets all over them as its head explodes. And then the step-siblings hug and call each other brother and sister after fighting before, but now they're locked out of the house and aren't sure how to get back in. And then they read a letter from the grandparents that gives them a big exposition dump as to why everything happened, and oh no, there's more monsters outside at the end. I don't know, I feel like a broken record, but this one is not very good. In fact, I think it might be one of my least favorite episodes in the series. The writing consists of multiple fake-out deaths from a monster that seemingly keeps getting killed by almost anything. Like, he's allergic to this guy specifically? Why? And the motivations of the grandparents hiding the monster from the kids and then locking them inside haphazardly explained in like a minute. Like, I don't understand. Why is the plot being told this way? The writing in this episode, I don't know, it just kind of sucks. Sorry, RL. 1 out of 10. So this one was one of my favorite episodes as a kid for some reason, and I'm really not sure why. This episode features Ricky the Rat, or at least that's what the kids at school call him, as he is a heavily bullied kid. Ricky here is breaking into the school at night to edit the school newspaper to include a message calling to all creeps to call his school bully's phone number after midnight, which is a very odd thing to do. As he's doing this though, he almost gets caught by the school bully and the teacher, but is able to barely make it out of the window in time. The next day at school, we get a look into Ricky's daily routine as he's pretty badly bullied, but thankfully, he's greeted by a new girl at school who quickly befriends him. That night when he's going to sleep, however, he gets a bunch of spam calls as the girl who bullies him saw the changes he made in the paper and reverted them to include his name in the school paper instead. The calls include very weird things, asking him to meet up and letting them know that they're creeps. The next day at school, Ricky is treated very nicely by 3 of his bullies, and eventually they throw him a note asking when the creeps will meet. He keeps getting pestered by these bullies, hoping to meet up with him, eventually kidnapping Ricky in the woods to show him their true creep form, which... What? Anyways, they see Ricky as their leader now for some reason and ask for help in spreading their identity seeds to convert more people into creeps. Before school the next day, Ricky is pressured to sneak into the cafeteria to put these seeds in the food and decides to put them in the tuna surprise as he knows no one eats it. That day at lunch, this is proven to be true as no kids transform, causing the creeps to confront Ricky again, threatening to eat him as they are starting to doubt he is their leader, when his new friend shows up out of nowhere saying that she is his second in command, and they eventually launch a new plan to put the seeds into some cookies for the upcoming bake sale. The next day at the bake sale, Ricky and his friend aren't exactly sure how they're going to stop this from happening, and before they can really do anything, one of the creeps yells, "Free cookies," and then all the kids of the school pile over to get some. Before they can bite into them though, Ricky hops up onto the mic on the auditorium stage to stop them, but before he can explain things, the crowd starts mocking and making fun of him, and after being told by the creeps that he would be the leader of all these future creeps, he relents and joins the creeps himself, ready to lead a small army of orange lizard people. I think what I did like about this episode was the ending, but overall I don't think this episode is that crazy good or anything. There's a lot of weird decisions and even weirder coincidences, like why are the alien lizards called creeps? Why do they just assume Ricky is their leader? Why will nobody eat the tuna surprise? All pressing questions that unfortunately do not get answered. So although it's not as great as I remember it being, I'm gonna give this one a 5.5 out of 10 because of the ending and more importantly because of my obvious nostalgic bias. The Benson family have just moved into the small, lovely town of Dark Falls due to the incredibly cheap housing prices. When the family pulls up to the town, they meet with their realtor, Mr. Dawes, also known as Compton. So Compton, California shows them around their new place, but when he's about to dip, the mom of the family wants him to join them in a family tradition, hanging this like shitty leaf wreath up, and then he gets kind of freaked out by it and dips. That night the family are all going to bed when the sister of the family, Amanda, sees a man watching her from the other house next door through the window, as well as a man with a bowler hat walking down their hallway. And although initially thinking it was her brother, she realizes it wasn't him and freaks out and wakes up her parents, who don't find anything suspicious. The next day the family is given a warm welcome by the mom of one of the neighbors and also does a weird stare at the wreath, kind of like the realtor did, and kind of acts mysteriously about certain stuff. A bit after this, the kids go to walk their dog, giving us a glimpse of the town as well as its people. Most of the houses are overgrown pieces of shit, and the inhabitants seem to be unfriendly hermits who have some sort of issue with sun. While the kids are out walking their dog Petey, they get surrounded quite literally by a group of kids from the town who all just act weird and silent. One of the kids looks suspiciously like the man Amanda saw the previous night in the hallway, and although he doesn't say it was him, he does say he used to live there. Also a part of this group is the daughter of the neighbor who visited them earlier that morning. That night while they're sleeping, Amanda is woken up by an emo-looking girl who tells her to get away while she still can, causing her to scream and yell and flip shit and resulting in her family and her finding a hole in her closet, which the dad repairs by just putting a board over it for now.
That night,
they again find that something has gotten through the wall in the same spot within the closet, and also find an old newspaper stating that the workers at their local chemical plant had all died from an explosion, causing the dad to be very upset with the landlord for simply saying the workers were laid off. Around this time the next day, the neighbor girl also comes over to visit with her awkward-looking bowler hat, also being very weird about the wreath in their living room. While she's visiting, the brother finds that the family dog has gotten away through a hole in the fence, so him and his sister go out to find him. And they do eventually find Petey, but he keeps running away from them, eventually resulting in them finding a graveyard they think he might have gone into. However, when they go into the graveyard to look, they overhear a bunch of townspeople meeting to discuss eating the new family sometime during that night. This eventually results in the two kids being chased all the way back to their house, where the parents are currently visiting with the neighbors, who let the family know about the undead townspeople wanting to break into the house and help them to board the place up with furniture. With the help of the neighbors, the family eventually decides to burn the wreath, as it seems to only cause bad things to happen since it was hung, meaning that it might be the cause of the zombie people. Turns out they were masterfully pranked, as the neighbors are also evil undead people who were only warded off by the wreath in the house, causing the family to be cornered, chased up all the way through their house by the horde of monsters who want to suck their blood and turn the family into one of them. As they're almost cornered in the attic, the kids realize that they are afraid of sunlight, so they rip the boards off of the attic windows, causing the room to be flooded with light, which evaporates a bunch of the monsters. The family is then finally able to run to their car and escape as their zombie vampire realtor guy begs them to stay. And after a hard cut, we see a scene a few minutes after driving away where they finally spot their dog Petey, who they quickly let into the car, but when Petey gets in, the editors turn his saturation level very far down, meaning that he must also be infected. Also, we get a little scene with RL and Petey at the end credits, and he also goes zombie mode here. Overall, this episode is like genuinely good, like not even Goosebumps quality good, but just solid horror. There's a lot of mystery that this episode is able to build up, as well as an incredible amount of tension and unexplained weirdness by the people of the town. And that's what I think Goosebumps kind of lacks, is the unexplainable, keeping things mysterious and creepy about the creatures instead of explaining everything in the last few minutes of an episode. Like, who was the girl who also warned the sister to leave, who also seemed to be a zombie? They're able to show up and disappear, like they're kind of teleporting or they're living in the walls of the house. I don't understand how that works. What exactly is going on? I'm not entirely sure. And we don't get an explanation, making these creatures feel a bit more complex than just zombie vampire hybrids. But yeah, great work, RL. I'm gonna give this one our first 10 out of 10. This episode starts off with our main character Jeff just playing with some dinosaur toys or whatever when his sister Kim and her friends scare him with an extremely convincing fake spider. Jeff gets angry at her for always trying to scare him when they're interrupted by the ring of the doorbell as their mom is given a mummy and like an urn to go along with it. Apparently her husband is an archaeologist in Egypt or something like that, and although she's surprised this wasn't delivered to their local museum instead, she is forced to sign and keep it at their house for now. They unpack the items contained in the package, and after a short amount of conversation, the audience sees that the urn from the delivery is opening itself as everyone else leaves the room. A bit later, the children's mom steps out as Kim's friend stays for a sleepover where they end up watching a mummy movie as his sister Kim continues to act like a total fucking freak to her brother, who seems unreasonably scared by almost everything. After getting too scared of like the most tame horror movie I think I might have ever seen, Jeff turns off the TV, which causes Kim to get the idea to inspect the mummy in the basement instead. As Jeff is inspecting the mummy, his sister and her friend run upstairs and lock him in the basement while he isn't looking. And while he's down there, the mummy comes back to life, so he goes through like another random door they just have in their basement, running back inside to let his sister and her friend know, who check back on the mummy, and of course he's just chilling there entirely still. The mom eventually gets back home and scares the shit out of her son, who is insistent that he saw the mummy move. But she calms him down and has him come downstairs with her as she works to inspect the sarcophagus, which essentially just involves holding a magnifying glass up to it and determining that he became a pharaoh after killing his pharaoh brother, so they have like a murderer mummy in their house. As the kids are presumably going to sleep, the mom ends up talking to the dad over the phone, who's in Egypt, who lets her know that he found some hieroglyphics in the tomb, and then we cut back to the mummy walking into Jeff's room, but JK, it's actually just a prank, it's his sister, but the actual mummy does show up like 2 seconds later, leading to a very, very slow game of tag, as the mom screams to them that the hieroglyphics the dad found say that the mummy wants the heart from the urn that the kid has. So anyways, there's like a little Looney Tunes chase scene, and the urn breaks over his sink, where Jeff is able to grind it up in the disposal, which kills the mummy. For the cliffhanger of this episode, the next morning the cat mummy that was buried with the original mummy comes back to life, so not sure how they're gonna deal with that. Do they have a cat heart for that too? I don't know. I really don't like this episode. I can understand how this might be perceived as scary by a younger kid, but the story and characters' actions just don't feel natural, and neither does the dialogue. It's honestly terrible, I'm not gonna lie. Not a fan of the writing. I don't know. I'm gonna give this one a 2 out of 10. It could be worse, but it definitely is not good.
A one-eyed, one-horn, flying purple people eater sure looks strange to me.
We open up the story with 2 kids inspecting a mysterious science experiment box filled with worms and a tentacle thing that comes out to grab the kid, and psych, it was just a story he wrote and is now telling to his friends as they're leaving school for the day. So this kid Zach and his friend Alex head home, but they decide on the way there to pop inside a taped-off building that was apparently destroyed by a recent storm to check things out inside. And in the store, Zach finds a typewriter that ends up shocking him, I guess. Anyways, he decides to steal the typewriter since he thought it would be super freaking epic for writing his scary stories. But when they're about to leave, they're stopped by a random lady that apparently owns the store, who asks them what they're doing there, before eventually just letting them take the typewriter anyways. I don't know. Once the 2 get back to Zach's house, Zach starts that writing grind on the typewriter, and everything he starts to type keeps coming true, which his friend realizes after a sudden violent storm blows in, and Zach's dad is nowhere to be found in the house after speaking to them only a few minutes prior to him disappearing. They test this by typing that a guy they know, Adam, one of the kids at the beginning, shows up out of nowhere at the front door, which he does, confused on how he got there. They try to prove this to Adam by showing off that the typewriter can just create reality out of nowhere, but he doesn't really believe it and jokingly types that a blob lurked in the basement before leaving the house. And a bit after this, Zach's dad shows back up out of nowhere, and the kids go to inspect the basement, finding no blob and eventually brushing everything off that happened as a coincidence. The next day, Zach has just finished writing a news story about the blob and eventually invites Alex over for dinner later to hear it. As Zach is talking to Alex over the phone about dinner, his dad suggests going to Blockbuster to rent a movie, but when he gets there, the store gets attacked by a giant blob monster, grabbing Zach, who is eventually able to escape, but the kid Adam, who thinks it's a joke, eventually ends up getting eaten. And the reason that this happens is that Zach had written a story about a video store being attacked by the blob earlier that day. To fix this, Zach runs back home and tries to use the typewriter to undo things, but can't because the keys are now stuck for some reason. This is interrupted when the blob breaks into the room and eats the typewriter, which suddenly causes Zach to have this amazing revelation that only the things he typed ended up coming true, so it must have just been him and not the typewriter making things come true. So he essentially just thinks really hard, and Professor X mindfucks the blob out of existence, bringing back Adam at the same time. This episode was kind of alright, I guess, kind of interesting, but the titular blob is maybe in 15% of the episode. I don't know, it feels like false advertising. Most of the episode just focuses more on the kid wanting to write a good story and messing around with the typewriter than the actual blob, and it wrecked a video rental store and eats a kid? That's it? It did not eat everything? And why does the blob immediately follow Zach back home and eat the typewriter? Does the blob know that the typewriter is being used to create things and could be used to stop it? And that ending was just so fucking abrupt. I don't know. This was a disappointing episode for me. Could be worse, I guess. I'm gonna go with a 2.5 out of 10. We open up with a girl sleeping in her bed when she's awoken in the middle of the night by something outside of her room, leading her to the attic where she finds a collection of dummies. She then hears one of the dummies talking to her, and although she initially thinks it's her brother, he walks in revealing it is not him, but the siblings soon discover that it's actually just their dad. The dad reveals that he's acquired a new addition to his collection of dummies, a broken Slappy the dummy, and apparently the parents also reveal that their cousin Zane is coming over to stay soon. Before the family heads to bed, the daughter says the phrase on the back of the card that always seems to come with Slappy's case, activating him yet again. And the next morning, Slappy's repaired good as new, and their cousin Zane, a young Anakin Skywalker, has come over to visit. Zane is seemingly afraid of almost everything, which isn't at all helped by his cousins who have pranked him in the past. And this is further not helped when later in that night, a prank is seemingly pulled again as one of the dummies is placed in Zane's room with a hockey mask, which scares the shit out of him, waking up everyone in the house, with the siblings getting the blame. The next day, Zane, who's also apparently a photographer, decides to show the siblings the process of him developing some of the pictures he took the previous day. While he's doing this though, it's revealed that the photos contain a bunch of pictures of the dummies together, which freaks Zane out again for some reason, causing the kids to get in trouble. Later that day, when they have to go to dinner the mom maid is ruined and the kids are yet again blamed. But that night, the sister again hears a noise coming from the attic, so she goes up to investigate, finding her brother hiding out to see who was messing with the dummies. Only for both of them to then catch Zane going up to the attic to mess with the dummies, revealing that he was the one pulling these pranks the entire time. So they confront him and force him to go downstairs to talk to their parents. And as the kids are leaving, Slappy comes back to life and decides to mess with the other dummies now, using his ghost breath, I guess, or something to make them come back to life. The next day, after Zane confesses and is punished, the kids seem to be pretty chill now, and so the parents decide to have a night out for themselves, leaving the kids alone. But while the parents are gone, the dummies have now started popping back up all over the house, with Slappy finally attacking the kids. The kids are able to shove him back in the suitcase though and throw him down the well, seemingly fixing the problem and going back to bed. But as the kids are falling asleep, Slappy pops back up and starts attacking two of the siblings, and eventually breathes on Zane while he sleeps, turning him into a dummy. To try and get rid of Slappy, the kids get the idea of getting the spell card that always comes with Slappy and instead reading it backwards to, I guess, get rid of him. So they go try to grab it back from the well that they threw him down previously, and unfortunately it's not in the case. So they go back to Slappy to try to get it back from him. The kids are then able to get the card back and read it backwards, causing the dummies to have the life drained out of them, or at least that's what they thought. Plot twist, this does nothing, and before the kids are about to be attacked again, they're able to convince one of the possessed dummies to attack Slappy instead, since their dad always cared so much about that guy, leading to an altercation between the two where Slappy is almost pushed off the roof before a huge lightning bolt comes out of nowhere and just explodes the dude. And this returns everything back to normal. Well, mostly. I thought this episode was pretty solid. I feel like it was maybe a bit longer than it needed to be, but I feel like it's comparable to the other previous Slappy episodes, so I guess maybe just because it seemed a little long-winded, I'll go with a 6.5 out of 10.
Electric Avenue, and then we'll take it high.
This episode is a pretty fun episode, I can't lie. This one starts off with two kids named Aaron and Marty as they explore Aaron's dad's prop room for the horror movies he works on for his studio, Shocker on Shock Street. And you can already see here, there's a lot of stuff from other episodes being repurposed, which is fun to see as someone who's watched all of these fucking episodes so far. Like, look here, there's one of the haunted masks, and then one of the masks from the Creeps and Calling All Creeps. As they're exploring the prop room, things start getting weird as it seems like some of the props are real and have come to life. But Aaron's dad walks in and reveals that he was just controlling them. Marty and Aaron's dad, having never met before, do a little small talk, a little yapping before Aaron notices a room with flashing lights behind her dad. But when she goes to investigate, they do the Goosebumps thing where some adult is like, "Don't go into that room is off limits." After this abrupt interruption, Aaron's dad shows off a prototype for a new ride he's developed and wants the kids to test it out. Aaron wants to invite her mother to test it, but weirdly the dad also gets kind of mean for a second and says no. But they eventually get on the ride and are given some laser guns to defend themselves, and honestly, this ride looks pretty cool. And see, look, there's the scarecrows from that Scarecrow Walks at Night episode. Eventually the ride stops though, and although they're warned not to, with the cart not moving, they're forced to go on foot in what looks like a slightly different set from Attack of the Jack-O-Lantern, and I think these are the mushrooms from Revenge of the Lawn Gnomes. As they walk around the town, each house has something weird going on in it, and eventually they enter the arcade building, taking an elevator down to a secret lab with live electrical wire and a scary swamp monster that attacks Marty, but eventually is warded off from the shock of the electricity. But Marty is also shocked in this process. This weirds out both of the kids as they feel like either her dad is evil or something is wrong, and they are eventually able to get all the way back up to Shock Street after fighting through a piranha head animatronic. While this is happening, we see the dad monitoring the situation on CCTV cams with a room full of all identical women that are likely robots, I'm guessing. Perhaps this was the room that Aaron saw at the beginning, maybe, perhaps. Then we cut back to the kids on Shock Street as her father is watching them from a distance trying to hide, with Aaron eventually seeing her father. Her father seems to be talking to someone else on the other end of his headset, saying, "Don't worry, I've got them," while messing around with his remote control device. Marty seems very uncomfortable, kind of weirded out by this, so he runs right into Aaron's dad, who messes with him for a bit before turning him off. Aaron starts to yell at him, asking what he did to Marty and why he made all of those monsters, and what did he do to their mom before she is also powered off. Aaron's dad, or Crater now I guess, calls back to his room of all identical women to help grab them, discussing that something must have gone wrong with him and that they have never been programmed to believe that they had a mother. We then get a final scene of Aaron's Crater dad making new versions of the kids, Marty 2 and Aaron 2, as the originals are still somehow on and say, like everything, they want to live, attacking their inventor before end credits. Bravo. This episode kind of feels like R.L. Stine tried to self-insert himself into a scenario where his own creations kind of revolted against him. Like the inventor has made a lot of these characters before and props that are being used for this episode, and suddenly he finds himself in one of his own films that we see he's responsible for. I don't know, maybe I'm just seeing things, but this feels like it's supposed to be RL. This episode definitely kept me on my toes as well. The whole time I was guessing what the plot twist would be, and I was never right. Fun episode, lots of fan servicey stuff thrown in as well. Hate to say it, but I'm gonna have to give this one a 9.5 out of 10.
They used to feel invisible. Now they know they invincible.
Hold up now, I thought we did this episode already. This episode starts off with two kids exploring a supposedly haunted house, trying to get footage of a ghost for a school project or something. I'm not sure I understand the educational benefit of having kids hunt ghosts, but anyways, they move around the house as they start seeing signs of a ghost, such as a smiley face drawn on a dusty mirror with a very high-fidelity CGI hand statue, and then they're given a note on a serving plate that says the ghost is ready for his close-up, and then in one of the chairs it spins around and says boo, so it seems like this ghost is kind of just like joking around, and then bam! Scary green screen ghost mask on the camera. Then we get a hard cut to the kid back at home, talking as his friend laughs at him for being scared, and once he gets inside, the ghost starts fucking around with the kid again, making him freak out and go downstairs to talk to his dad, who is like a scientist who is implied to hunt ghosts or something. Anyways, he's able to barely get some sleep before the next day, and at school, he tells his friend about the ghost, who just thinks he sounds stupid, which is kind of understandable, but she also saw it? No? Like, I don't understand why she... Anyways, that night the ghost starts messing with a bunch of other things again, eventually resulting in a bad green screen clown mask again before the kid wakes up, so it was just a dream, I guess. Except no, the ghost is right there messing with like a little marble desk toy thing. When the main kid touches it, the ghost says, "Hey, I was playing with that." And then the kid explains that he's the ghost of Hedge House or something and wants to be his friend. After freaking out but eventually calming down, they decide that they're chill, but actually the ghost kid is kind of a shithead who keeps embarrassing and playing pranks on his new buddy, such as when the main kid tries to show his friend the real ghost and he just doesn't do anything. And then he makes him get math problems wrong in front of everyone. He also gets him beat up by his school bullies, so the ghost is really fucking with his life. This results in the kid telling the ghost to fuck off, which makes the ghost very upset, causing him to storm off. Until later in the night where they meet again, as the main kid is able to be convinced by his friend to go back to get more ghost footage, which, like, the girl agrees that the ghosts exist. Why didn't she believe that he saw the ghost? I don't understand. And then when they get there, the ghost messes with them again, this time chasing the main kid all the way home to his parents in the living room, who are going full Ghostbuster mode, I guess, shining a special ghost light to see a kid. And this is where the episode nosedives. This was like a 7 or an 8 out of 10 up until this moment. As the dad says, "Oh, it's just a human," and then they reveal themselves to be alien creatures who took over the planet, and this was a human that was left behind. And they all have annoying orange faces on the back of their heads and are evil now, I guess? Yeah, you lost me. You lost me there, Arla. I'm not sure what was up with that. I thought the plot was relatively okay, but that twist is just so abrupt and nonsensical in my opinion. Like, so many aspects of this are confusing as to why characters behave a certain way, and kind of retroactively makes this episode worse. Now, I could see the comparison between this twist and the end of Welcome to Camp Nightmare from season 1, where it pans up to Earth, but that twist still at least fell in line with our understanding of how the characters acted. This one just doesn't make any sense and feels forced in. I'm gonna give this one a 6 out of 10. It's a good example of what happens when you really don't stick the landing on an ending. Shit is like Game of Thrones season 8, and 7, maybe 6 as well.
This is the point of no return. I can never go back. Life without parole, upstate shackled.
This episode starts off with a group of 3 kids who are waiting outside a supposedly haunted house as they wait for someone inside they have made seemingly go into the house of no return. It's kind of like the title. They're about to go get the kid when he runs out, failing the test partially because they just didn't like him and partially because he wasn't brave enough for their danger group club or something. The kids are kind of hypocrites though, as they're all too afraid to go in themselves and kind of come across as a group of bullies. The next day they see a new kid at school and want to recruit him into their danger club. They say he has to do some sort of initiation by going into the house of no return. But once they get there and explain everything to him, he backs out much to their disappointment. Frustrated that they aren't getting new members, they lure the new kid out to hang again, and he eventually goes along thinking they're just a bunch of kids that don't really mean any harm, but nah, they straight up grab his ass and force him to go into the house. That's kind of fucked up. That's not a cool thing to do to somebody. That's not how you make friends, guys. Inside the house, things start being thrown around from the upper level of the house, and the new kid eventually hears a pair of voices talking to him. After waiting a while, the trio of kids decide to go to the house to let the new kid know that he's a part of the club that he didn't even want to be in the first place. But when they go inside, the door locks behind them, and bam, there's an old ghost couple that explained that the new kid made a deal to let him go in exchange for them, and the ghosts want this trio as their new adopted kids. And, the end. This episode feels like one that probably would have been genuinely kind of scary for a kid, especially that ending. They do like a pretty good job at making these ghosts look pretty scary. I like the subversion where the main characters are actually kind of the antagonists of the story, and yeah, maybe it's been done before with like Go Eat Worms to an extent, but I think it's pulled off here a lot better. I don't know, this episode doesn't really have any flaws. Overall, it's pretty good. I'm gonna give this one a 9 out of 10.
It drops deep as it does in my breath. I never sleep, cause sleep is the cousin of death.
This episode stars a kid named Matt, the youngest in the family, and for that reason, he also feels like he's the one with the least amount of freedoms in the household of the 2 other siblings. After being told no over and over again to a bunch of other requests, he asks his mom to move his room into the attic so he'll have more privacy in room, where he is yet again told no. Disobeying his mom, he ends up going up to the room and starts talking to himself, or a mannequin I guess, and says that he hates reality before falling asleep as the fan in the room starts going hog wild. The next morning he wakes up and things are a bit different. He has his own phone now, and apparently he has like sponsorship deals all over the place thanks to being an admired hockey player. That morning he has a game to get to though. The only issue is that he has never played hockey before. As he leaves for the game with his mom, unsure of how to handle this, a group of guys in black suits, aka kind of the men in black pretty much, are watching him from a distance. When he gets to the game, he gets absolutely clowned on since he has no idea how to even like skate, and during the game he's attacked and mocked by the 2 men in black who seem to be teleporting in and out of reality. From here, Matt gets teleported from reality to reality, one where he needs to perform brain surgery on the president, one where he's part of a bomb squad, and one where he needs to get married to a not so bad bitch. A lot of pressure on the guy. eventually leading him to being sent to a court where he is tried for messing with reality by claiming that he hated it back in his room. After trying to defend himself, he is officially declared guilty with a bunch of zoom-ins and claustrophobic camera angles when bam, he wakes up back to reality, happy to be back and content with his life as a kid, with not so much overwhelming responsibility. Before the episode ends though, his mom forces him to grab his stuff back from the attic, stating that he's just happy to have his boring life back, and then bam, the Men in Black show back up as he's called reality boring, which is guilty of reality crime, I guess. Yeah, fun episode. Cool message to kids to not always focus so much on growing up and to appreciate this moment in life when things aren't as stressful. Although I will say, my man just wanted like a phone and to hang out with his friends. I don't think that's too much to ask for. The jumping from reality to reality was interesting, but I wish it wasn't like the whole episode essentially, but I don't know, I feel a bit nitpicky calling that out. Good episode, but not one of my favorites or anything, so I'm gonna give this one a 7.5 out of 10. Pretty good.
Something in the hallway. The box cutter went.
It's like a Click. It's like the Adam Sandler movie. But it has like a universal. This is actually just Click. When did Click come out? What? Adam Sandler. You have some explaining to do, buddy. So yes, it's like Adam Sandler movie Click. Some kid named Seth gets a universal remote in the mail, which he accidentally realizes can be used on pretty much anything. You know, people, fish, appliances, shit works on everything, and for this reason, Seth messes around with it for a bit, cheating for tests, messing with a bully, but the entire time he gets warning after warning from a man from the commercials on TV, seemingly talking to him directly, and eventually straight up messaging him directly saying that he has to be responsible and that using it irresponsibly could result in certain consequences. This all culminates into a new issue as Seth's sister tried to grab the remote from him, causing it to break. So when he goes to pause his family from nagging him a few seconds later, he can't unpause them. He then, with the help of his friend, desperately tried to fix the situation, calling the company to no avail, going to their store location, which seems to be vacant, until Seth finally tries to repair the remote himself, despite a bunch of phone calls from the infomercial man telling him not to. And although this fix doesn't initially work, his friend suggests shaking it, and hey, what do you know, it unpauses them. Traumatized by this event, Seth's friend suggests, just throwing the remote away, and eventually Seth relents, but as his friend leaves, he grabs it back from the trash can. The next day at school, the remote falls out of Seth's locker in front of his friend, leading to a confrontation where his friend tries to take the remote, resulting in Seth throwing him on the ground, but eventually it stops working as his friend begs him not to use it, finally until Seth boils over, pressing the power button, maybe attempting to kill his friend, but this seemingly might have ended his own life? It's hard to tell, but Seth awakes in a void with only the infomercial man and a new remote for him. This episode was pretty solid. The effects here are actually pretty decent for the people being paused and unpaused in certain scenes. It's also very nostalgic to see the old TV UI for volume and rewinding, that sort of thing on display here. That being said, the episode is a bit predictable, and I wouldn't say that the first half of this episode is really all that interesting, but that being said, it's not bad. I'll give this one a 7 out of 10. It's good enough for Adam Sandler to possibly have repurposed.
Back in 1912, I could kick your ass. I did the tango and the foxtrot before it got banned. There was...
This episode is something. Two brothers, Tom and John, are being babysat that weekend by their Aunt Dahlia, a fairly eccentric woman. While the boys are playing with their 90s version of what people thought VR headsets would look like, their aunt brings them over some prune cookies that seem to be moving. Not sure if these are actual prunes or not, but either way, the kids think they're pretty good and devour quite a few. The next morning when they wake up, however, they notice that their back hurts and they feel sluggish, and when they get out of the bed, they realize that they are old. The aunt tries to play it off and decides to invite her friends over to see the boys, and this is where things start to, not age well is probably a good way to put it. The old ladies start to flirt with the boys and they get uncomfortable, so they try to make an excuse to go to the store, but the aunt only lets one of them go. As John is at the convenience store going to grab some milk, he realizes that he's become even older while he's there. And once he gets back to the home, he notices his brother is a lot older too. They try to sneak off and call their mother, but the phone line has their aunt listening in on the other side, and after Tom is able to sneak off again to look into his aunt's room, he overhears the old ladies discussing marrying the kids. The kids are able to sneak into the kitchen as John has kind of lost his marbles at this point and is looking for something that isn't too hard on his teeth, eventually eating baby food, which magically turns him younger, so the kids start copiously consuming that shit until they're back to being young. Suspicious of what's going on in the kitchen, the old ladies break in to find that the kids aren't old anymore, and their aunt tries to attack them, with John throwing the prune juice all over his aunt, causing her to get old and fucking melt out of existence. Our friends get scared and skedaddle off, with the boys finally safe, except a little later when John goes to check on his brother, he's a baby after eating too much baby food. So John fishes a leftover prune macaroon cookie from the trash to try and turn Tom back to normal, and roll credits. So yeah, I mean, you gotta admit, when it comes to things that are terrifying, you know, grooming and pedophilia are probably pretty high up on that list, you know? So yeah, this episode made me a bit uncomfortable with like the whole old lady grooming subplot. You know, I did like the ideas of them just being old guys, but why did you have to make the aunt's motivation to pimp out her own nephews? Why? Really not sure where to put this one, because I don't think it's as boring as certain episodes, and it has some entertaining moments, but it's just so weird. Shit made me fucking uncomfortable. I don't know. I'm gonna go with a 2 out of 10.
Dogs begin to bark. Hounds begin to howl.
This episode starts off with a flashback to almost 400 years ago as a pair of thieves attempt to hide some gold they stole, eventually being chased into the Tree of Change, or at least that's what one of the thieves called it. From here, we quickly jump back to the 90s, where a kid just moved into a new house with his family and is trying to sleep, except, there's a scary dog face scared him in the middle of the night, except it's actually just his asshole brother Mickey. In the middle of the night, he also hears dogs hanging in his front yard. The next morning, Cameron goes out to the woods to follow these dog prints, leading him to a river where he finds a piece of gold, as well as a dog magically appearing out of the water to bark at him. After this, he runs into a girl named Fergie who seems to know his name already, and then says he needs to move out of the house they're staying in because it's haunted or something. She then mysteriously runs off, and as she does, Cameron gets attacked on both sides by a pair of black labs who chase him back to his house. When he's back home, he's able to tell his dad about what happened, and for some reason, his dad just doesn't believe him. I don't think dogs chasing a kid is all that hard to believe, but anyways, that night when Cameron's sleeping, he hears a lot of noise coming from downstairs, and when he goes to investigate, the whole kitchen has been torn apart with the dogs popping out again to corner him. Cameron calls to his brother for help, but as soon as he does, the dogs hop through the walls, I guess. The next day, pretty much no one believes Cameron besides this Fergie girl, who was apparently friends with Cameron's older brother and had previously attempted to prank and scare him when they first met, but they're cool now, I guess. So she suggests going back to the woods that night to find the dogs. So they end up doing this and are attacked by the dogs, eventually being pushed into the tree the thieves used at the beginning, where it's revealed that the dogs are actually the spirits of the thieves possessing the dogs, and they brought the kids here to switch with their bodies. The thieves are successfully able to do this, leaving the kids as black labs, and now with the consciousness of the thieves in the mind of the kids. Before bam, the dogs come back and they're able to get the thieves who are also them, but not actually them, back to the tree cave area where they finally are switched back. But it seems Cameron's brother in the process switches consciousness with a squirrel. Yeah, this episode's a bit all over the place. I'm not a huge fan of what's going on here. The plot is relatively convoluted and not all that much compelling stuff happens from my perspective, and it doesn't really have anything scary about it other than I guess the concept of being stuck in a dog's body. Whole episode was very reminiscent of some of the season 1 and 2 episodes that I wasn't a big fan of. Not horrible, but also not great. I'm gonna give this one a 3 out of 10. This episode starts off with a family lost on their family road trip because, yeah, I guess this was the days before Google Maps and shit. After arguing for a bit, they decide to try to find a gas station, but instead are assaulted by green screen fireballs and like a goblin dude as part of a Horrorland advertisement, I guess. But the family kind of just immediately forgets about this and decides to go to Horrorland since they can't find the zoo garden that they wanted to go to. When they get there, one of the goblin dudes or horrors places a bomb or a GPS device under their car, not sure which one to be honest, as they enter the park. Once they're in the park, the kids split up from the parents to go explore things on their own when they're jump scared by one of the horrors who tells them it's dangerous and that they need to leave. The kids ignore him and go through a House of Mirrors attraction, with the sister almost getting crushed to death, while the parents get some finger juice and decide that they want to leave the park after things seem a little too weird. While the parents look for the kids go on a coffin ride, lazy river type attraction that freaks the kids out, and after the ride, the kids and parents meet back up and attempt to leave the park, but the gate to leave is locked shut. As they try to find another way out, the horrors pop back up and try to stop them, resulting in a chase through the park into a Horrorland game show where they are the contestants for an audience of horrors. The first show that they have is a hidden camera show, while the second show is essentially Wheel of Fortune. We also get like these commercial breaks for a monster R&B album, which is pretty amazing, not gonna lie.
50 Monster Love hits, and if you order now, you'll get My Flesh is Crawling Over to You, and so much more.
When we get back from the commercial, the parents are able to guess the phrase, the Morris family is lunch, before cutting to another commercial break, this time for human action figures.
Put them in water, throw them in the air, or just jump up and down on them.
Once they get back from commercial, the family is forced to choose between 2 doors, one having a car and one having a monster named Ripper, and they of course choose Ripper and are forced down into his cave, but are thankfully let out by a friendly horror who is attacked almost immediately by Ripper after they escape. The family is eventually able to get through a hole in the fence back to their car, where they are jumped by the horrors but are eventually able to drive off until it's revealed that the thing placed under their car at the beginning is a remote control device controlled by the TV host, leaving us on a literal cliffhanger as a couple of horrors turn off their TV channel, tired of this episode. I remember liking this episode a lot as a kid, but unlike Calling All Creeps, I can see why I like this one a lot more. You can definitely tell that they had a lot of fun making this episode. There's a lot of absurdity mixed into it. I don't know, I'm actually a really big fan. I was going to give it a 9 out of 10, but I think it deserves a 10 out of 10. This episode starts off with two kids, Jonathan and Nadine, who are on their way to a school pep rally when they're stopped by a girl whose cat ran into a creepy old house. The two friends offer to go in and look for the cat, but when they get upstairs, they find a board game saying "do not open." So naturally, they decide to open the box, which teleports them into the board game. To leave the house, they are forced to play the game and collect items that can be used to help them in round 2 of the game. And of course, to play, they roll a set of D6s, with apparently a 7 resulting in them possibly dying, I think? It's tough to say. Anyways, they start playing, being teleported room to room, each with their own riddle and weird undead people, each time being able to escape by rolling the dice until they're finally let into a secret room where they are attacked by what first looks to be more undead people, but turns out it's just another set of kids who have been stuck in the game for years supposedly. Although a group of kids look for an exit, one of the new kids, Noah, gets sucked through a laundry basket, leaving only 3 of them now. Eventually, the trio are able to find Noah again and are able to use the tools they had previously gathered to find the front door, but are stopped by the undead people they saw in the first round of the game. But thanks to bringing a camera for the pep rally, they're able to use the flash to make the undead people disappear, but not before Noah and Annie, the 2 kids they found, turn into the 2 undead people they previously saw, saying they can't leave as they're now a part of the game. To get out of there, Jonathan rolls the dice one more time near the 2 undead people, rolling a 7, which makes them disappear, I guess, even though they weren't the ones who rolled it. Either way, the 2 are able to get out, but at the end, we see 2 more kids lured into the house by the little girl to help find her cat. Overall, I thought this episode was fairly decent. Nothing that really stood out to me or I felt was super interesting, but nothing particularly bad about it either. So I'm gonna give this one a 6.5 out of 10.
I used to get straight A's, read my books in Catholic school.
While his parents are out for date night, poor Riley is stuck home alone when the power suddenly goes out and an armed robber breaks into his room, except it's not actually a robber, but is instead his brother who has now just been caught by his parents. Because this isn't the first time messing with his brother, his parents decide to send their son Brian to one of those military-like behavioral training schools that you'd hear or see on TV back in the day, and were in some cases are revealed to be very unethical. Brian then takes a bus to the school where he meets a new friend, and once they get there, they do the standard military impersonation of being overly strict and cruel to kids. While standing in line to get checked in, Brian starts a fight with one of the existing students who is eventually dragged away for misbehaving. On the first day of classes, they're asked to complete a large book answering many personal questions about themselves before heading to lunch, where Brian realizes that the kid that bothered him yesterday isn't there. While cleaning a set of stairs with toothbrushes, Brian is greeted by that same kid from yesterday who is now acting perfect after having his program accelerated and is actually being sent home that day. Brian, weirded out by this, doesn't want to turn out like this kid, so he attempts to escape but realizes that the fence is electrified after testing it with his belt, and once he touches it, it results in a bunch of alarms going off and a huge lockdown on the school campus to figure out who's trying to escape. The headmaster of the school goes door to door to see who's missing, and just before the headmaster walks into his room, Brian is able to make it back through the window and show up in his room, getting himself out of trouble. The next night, Brian sneaks out of his room again and is able to find a phone in the headmaster's room, calling his mom to warn him that something is wrong with this place, but is caught by the headmaster, causing his program to be accelerated. Later that night, while he's sleeping, a group of people come into his room and inject him with what seems to be anesthesia, taking him to an operating room where they perform measurements and other calculations on him before being woken up by his buddy who tells him he'll be late for class, making it difficult to tell if it was or wasn't a dream. During class, Brian talks to his buddy about one of the kids who keeps sucking up to the teacher, thinking he might be a spy, which causes the teacher to send Brian to the headmaster for talking in class. While waiting for the headmaster, the kid he thinks is a spy named Joe talks to Brian about escaping, saying the only real reason he's been acting super cooperative is to try and escape, but Brian is still suspicious of him. Joe is the first one to have to talk to the headmaster, and while Brian waits in the lobby, he overhears voices in a nearby room and goes to investigate, finding voices coming from a vent in a room with a computer. Brian tries using the computer in the room to see what's going on, finding that his file says he's 95% complete. But before he can find out anything more, he's interrupted by a guard checking on the room, with him somehow able to make it through the vent in the room to escape. After escaping, he's able to find his friend, who is able to make a distraction as Brian heads to the nursery, discovering a clone of himself who comes alive in a scene that deeply horrified my buddy, who was disturbed by belly buttons when I watched this episode a few years ago. Brian and his buddy attempt to escape, but plot twist, Brian's friend is actually a spy and he tries to throw him in the cell where they're keeping the other kids, but the kids in the cell hold the snitch back. When he gets out, he's confronted by all the other clones as well as a clone of himself who says he won't let him escape. And it seems like the clone was successful as we flash forward in time to Brian eating dinner with his family, finally perfect as the real Brian and the others rot in a cell, except no, the real Brian did escape, and the one in the cell is the clone, and the real Brian is now attempting to break the others out of the school. Yeah, this episode was pretty solid. It has a good premise that was well telegraphed and executed well too. There's a lot of mystery and suspense throughout the episode, and overall, I think this is pretty solid. I'm going to give this one a 8.5 out of 10. This episode starts off with a young kid named Alex leaving the bus at a shady-looking bus stop to stay with his Aunt Marta and Uncle Colin in a town called Wolf Creek. He ends up falling asleep waiting for his uncle to pick him up, as apparently his uncle's car was having trouble, but he does eventually show up in the morning and gets a warm welcome to his new home. Alex talks to the both of them about wanting to enter a photo competition for a horror magazine and wants both of their advice, as they're apparently photographers. Seeing the house across the street is a possible opportunity for a scary pic, but both his aunt and uncle tell him that they better leave the family that live there, the Mullins family, alone, as they're a bit crazy. As Alex settles in, he decides to explore around the town a little to see if he can get any cool pictures, eventually landing himself in the Wolf Creek woods, where he is scared by his first new friend, Hannah. After talking for a bit, Hannah says that they have to get going as it's almost night and the woods are dangerous at night, with her running off as it suddenly turns night, I guess. Must have been an issue with reshoots or something, but anyways, Alex is chased away by some sort of wolf creature back to his aunt, who takes him home and tells him to stay out of the woods and stay inside at night. The next day at class, Alex's new teacher is talking about legends when one of his classmates brings up werewolves that live in the town who supposedly shed their skin, with destroying the skin before the full moon being the only way to break the werewolf curse. This kid challenges Alex to meet him and his buddy in the woods that night to show him werewolves are actually real, with Hannah later warning him not to go. When Alex does eventually try to leave that night, he finds that he's been locked into his room and his windows have been barred by his aunt and uncle, who don't want him leaving the house at night, when suddenly Alex sees werewolves leaving the neighbor's house, and they start to try and attack him through the window, bending the metal bars on his window before being scared off by his camera's flash. In the morning, he tries to tell his aunt and uncle about the werewolves, but they dismiss it and blame it on a bear. The following night, Alex breaks out of his room to try to get evidence of the werewolves, even though I thought he already kind of took a picture of them, but anyways, we get 2 fake out dream sequences before Alex wakes up in the morning in the forest, finding his aunt and uncle's car totaled. Alex rushes home to see if they're okay, and when he looks out his window, he sees that the werewolves are shedding their skin in the neighbor's house, revealing that the werewolves are actually his aunt and uncle. Alex tries to play things off as he goes to school, later telling Hannah, who says that they should try to bury the werewolf skins, so they go into the Mullins home, with the kids who challenged Alex previously watching from a distance. As they're collecting the skins, Alex's aunt and uncle walk over to the house and find that their skins are missing, so Alex and Hannah quickly try to get away to get rid of the skins and decide to bury them, I guess. Hannah eventually runs off as it's getting late, and Alex continues digging as he's scared by his classmates who try to prank him, when all of a sudden the werewolf skins come back to life, grabbing them and scaring them off. After they're gone, Alex's aunt and uncle come up to him in like a zombie-like state, trying to get their skins back, so Alex fights the skins and his relatives with a shovel before the full moon explodes the skins. This is a real deal explosion here. They must have had to use a lot of the budget for this one. Anyways, this frees his relatives from the curse, and happily ever after, except when Alex is developing some of the photos the next day, he notices that Hannah is in one of the photos shedding her werewolf skin, so she's a werewolf, I guess. And roll credits. I'm not sure I understand the werewolf curse fully. It seems like there's a mythos built around it, but it's super inconsistent. Like, why did Alex bury it? I thought it needed to be destroyed before the full moon. Did the werewolves just voluntarily put the skin on whenever they want after dark? Why did his aunt and uncle start acting like zombies, but Hannah was just fine during this whole time? Lots of stuff I don't understand, but I guess it was enjoyable enough. But I don't know, the plot holes and inconsistencies kind of bring it down a bit for me, but it's still relatively good, so I don't know, I'll give this one a 6 out of 10.
The ants go marching one by one, hurrah, hurrah. The ants go marching.
This episode starts off with 2 friends getting some ice cream when they realize their ice cream is covered in ants, causing an exterminator to be called, who is a huge weirdo who is like obsessed with ants. After he kills the queen by punching a hole through the wall, he gives little Dave a brochure for awesome ants, so he can have his own ant colony for a school science project. The next day, Dave's order has already showed up, including a giant enclosure for his ants, as well as some weird food pellets and a phone book-sized instruction booklet. Dave's buddy Ben decides to give them a worm, as he doesn't believe the ants are getting enough food from a single pellet a day like the book instructed, and the ants consume the worm in seconds, so Dave thinks they must be really hungry, so he feeds the ants a few old hot dogs they were going to throw out anyways. That night, Dave sees ants all over the cookies his mom brought him, which I guess is a vision because she doesn't really acknowledge them. I don't know. We also get a glimpse of one of the ants massively growing overnight. And the next morning, a huge amount of ants are found crawling all over their kitchen, and the locked door on the cage apparently was broken open. That day at school, Dave is giving a presentation on ants when the exterminator guy randomly shows up again, I guess, and talks to Dave after, saying that he lied in his presentation because the ants in his video were way too big for the species they were supposed to be. When Dave gets home, he finds the cinder block he put on top of the enclosure has been split in half, so Dave is forced to put a new lock on the enclosure. That night, he calls the Awesome Ants Company to get help, who berate him for not reading the instructions, all the while Dave is oblivious to a giant ant trying to break out of its enclosure. After the Awesome Ants operator hangs up after providing no help, Dave finds a giant ant in his room who seems to be trying to attack him. After Dave kills it with the tennis racket, he runs to trying to get help from anybody, but he can't seem to find anyone, so he goes to try and find the exterminator guy, who's nowhere to be found either. And as he's at the exterminator shop, a huge ant breaks in, snatching Dave, and then he wakes up. Why? Why is Goosebumps so obsessed with fake-out dream sequences? I will never know. But they got you again as Dave wakes up and realizes something is off as the ant enclosure is gone and they're eating the ant food pellets, and turns out they're in a human enclosure run by giant ants, so the whole episode is a dream sequence. This definitely felt like an ending that ruins the episode for me. I mean, I guess it's kind of a fun concept to think of an alternate reality where ants are giant and rule over humans, but just discarding the entire rest of the plot as a dream sequence is a fucking terrible decision in my opinion. A very frustrating ending to an episode I already thought was kind of mediocre. 2 out of 10. This episode starts off with a random dude foraging around a dumpster to look for stuff to sell, I guess, when he stumbles across Slappy's suitcase and utters the phrase on the card needed to awaken him, causing Slappy to rise out of his suitcase and make him an offer he cannot refuse. We then cut to the same man now performing with Slappy at school, now seemingly being partners with him. As they're performing, Slappy becomes infatuated with a girl's doll in the audience, and after the show, the doll disappears, so the little girl who owns the doll runs away to go look for the doll, leaving her older sister and her sister's friend to go look around for her and the doll. As the older sister is looking for the doll, she overhears Slappy arguing to his owner about their agreement, but as this is going on, the girl named Jillian accidentally opens the door, spilling into the room. To play this off, Jimmy says he's installed a motor and voice recording on Slappy for a new routine he's been working on, before offering to send the girl's doll to her address if he finds it, as he quickly tries to get her out of the room. The little girl was eventually able to find the doll, saying the doll wanted to meet Slappy, I guess. That night, Jillian is at home with her family as well as her sister's doll when they get an unexpected package. Slappy, who apparently Jimmy decided to give to Jillian to take care of. Jillian decides she wants to put Slappy in the basement, thinking he's creepy, but is interrupted by her sister and her doll who want Slappy in their room. Jillian obviously disagrees, causing Slappy to bite her, and she's eventually able to get him off of him. But that night, Slappy sneaks upstairs into the girl's room to write a message on the mirror saying he wants the girl's doll as his bride. Jillian believes her sister is responsible as she keeps talking about the doll as if it's alive or something, you know, maybe foreshadowing, I don't know. And later that morning, their mom confronts them about her missing wedding ring, which Slappy has apparently stolen. Jillian goes back to Jimmy to try to return Slappy, but learns that Slappy is in fact alive and destroyed his other dummies and forced him to send Slappy to her. She then opens the case to give Slappy back, but ends up finding the family dog inside, meaning Slappy is back home, and sure enough, he is back home with Jillian's little sister, her friend, and her doll. Jillian calls her sister and warns her about Slappy, but Slappy ends up answering instead, locking her little sister's friend in the bathroom and turning off the house's power. Eventually, Jillian is able to get home, and as her sister attempts to escape, they're stopped by Slappy, who wants the girl's doll as his bride. As the siblings try to escape, the girl's doll fights back, also coming to life and explaining she constantly makes the little sister do whatever she wants at the threat of hurting the girl's family. As they try to escape, Slappy cuts them off, revealing he has a ring, but plot twist, he wants to marry the little girl Katie and not the doll. The girl doll Mary Ellen then starts fighting Slappy, allowing Jillian to have enough time to turn the power back on, as well as the conveniently placed circular saw in the basement, cutting the dolls in half and causing the spirits inside the dolls to escape. When the girl's parents get home, they realize they completely forgot about the little girl's friend, but when they go to check on him, they find he has been possessed by the spirit of Slappy. This episode was pretty alright. I'd say fairly comparable to the first Slappy episode we get in the series. Maybe a slight improvement. I don't know. I'll still give this one a 7 out of 10.
To talk to tomatoes, if a squash can make you smile.
This episode opens up with our main guy Nick meeting his new baby sister Grace. Upon her arriving home, he has to deal with the normal baby stuff, with her being like loud, getting all the attention, and throwing up all over him. But after a while, Nick thinks that she is doing this on purpose. One time when he's with her, she spells out "only me" with a set of blocks that he finds really weird, but his friend doesn't really believe him. That same night, Nick wakes up to the fridge being completely ransacked and her downstairs watching TV, saying what I think is "your history, big brother." I can barely make out the words here. Their parents come downstairs to see what the commotion is, and obviously blame it on Nick, as the baby is, a baby. The next day, Nick finds a binky in a bag of frozen sausage patties, so he goes up to return it to Grace, baiting her into talking, saying she will be the only one, only to reveal he was recording her on a cassette. Upon revealing this, the baby starts going sicko mode, using her powers to slam the door shut and revealing like some set of spooky eyes. And when his parents get home, Nick goes to play the recording. However, the audio of her talking was disrupted, making him look like a fucking idiot, which is not at all helped by him going to his room to see it destroyed, and declares to his parents that the baby, without teeth, has eaten one of his math books. Later that day, his parents talk with Nick about sending him to live with his grandparents for a bit, but the convo is interrupted by a call from the doctor after Nick had called them about the situation and explained that they got the wrong baby. Both his parents have to go down to talk to the doctor, so they leave Nick in charge of babysitting. To keep things calm, Nick invited over his friend, who eventually ends up leaving after finding the CD she let him borrow was chewed through, thinking Nick is crazy for blaming it on the baby. After his friend leaves, the power goes off and the baby starts breaking shit across the house, eating Nick's gerbil, that sort of thing, when suddenly their parents get home, and thankfully, the doctor confirmed that it was, in fact, not their baby, so the other parents come to swap babies and are revealed to be a set of monster demons or something like that. And as the episode ends, Nick's real baby sister talks to him, meaning she might also be possessed. This episode is definitely a bit better than I expected. I can't lie, at the beginning it was a little slow and I didn't really care about what was going on, but once it got its momentum going, I thought it was pretty solid and an interesting premise for an episode. So I'm gonna go with a 6.5 out of 10. This episode starts off with a dream sequence, I think, of like an evil ghost creature popping through the window of our main character Greg, this time not played by Ryan Gosling, as he's sleeping, and the ghost uses this evil camera again from the first installment to take his picture. His mom walks in as this is happening though and turns the lights on, causing the creature to disappear. We then transition to the next day where Greg is in class, and for some reason is the only one in class, as his teacher reads a report he wrote about the evil camera, giving him an F as he doesn't believe it was a true story and the assignment was supposed to be about a real experience in his life. To get his grade changed, he has to provide proof that the evil camera exists, heading back to where the old building was from the first episode, only to find it has been demolished. As he's looking around the area though, he finds a trapdoor that leads underground with the camera magically just chilling on a desk. As he grabs the camera, a random security guard comes out of nowhere and asks for the camera back, causing Greg to take a picture of the poor dude, who falls down the stairs as Greg escapes. The next day, Greg is messing around with the backpack in the middle of the sidewalk as he's walking to school, when what seems like the ghost from earlier that episode sneaks up behind him before disappearing and whispering, "Say cheese." He then bumps into his friend that was in the last episode, who tells him to put the camera back, leading to a struggle where they both take pictures of each other while fighting for the camera, I guess. One shows a negative of the girl, while the photo of Greg shows him as fat, and instead of just ripping up the photos like they learned in the first episode, they assume the camera is just broken instead, obviously. And instead of going to school to show off the camera, I guess we just cut back to Greg going to sleep that night, only to wake up now overweight and... Why does he look like that? Why does it look like they used a Snapchat filter on him? Anyways, Greg goes to school with the camera, laughed at by pretty much everyone because he's fat now, so he runs out of the classroom after breaking his chair. After he gets home, he runs into his friend who is now constantly becoming skinnier as he's only growing fatter. So they decide to take another picture of themselves to try and undo things, but it only makes things worse. So they then get the idea to go to a photo development shop where Greg's brother works to have him turn the photo of the girl into a positive and the positive photos of Greg into a negative to undo things, which guys, I thought we already established we could just rip up the photos last time. Anyways, his brother is able to pull it off at the last second and the kids go back to normal. The next day, Greg goes back to school to hopefully get an A, but his teacher still doesn't believe him and forces Greg to take a picture of him as they wrestle for the camera, causing the teacher to lose his hair. This episode deeply infuriated me as someone who's seen the first one. It's like any of the lessons learned or plot points from the first episode are just entirely thrown out, which would have been alright, I guess, if it wasn't the same cast of characters who just somehow don't remember how things work. The characters also act extremely out of character, such as when Greg takes a picture of the innocent security guard, when in the past he refused to take a picture even of his school bullies. Also, the plot point of Spider from the last episode is just thrown out entirely, which I guess isn't a big deal, but the entire weird ghost entity they tease throughout the episode is just never brought up or explained. There's so many nonsensical things that happen in this episode that ruin the first for me. So yeah, I'm pissed. I'm gonna have to give this a 1 out of 10. So we start off this episode with a creepy nighttime introduction by a mysterious man to Carlsville, who says, "It is time to play the game."
Time to play the game.
before panning out to reveal what seems to be a small replica of the town. We then transition to some kids just hanging out, looking at some baseball cards, apparently selling them for a garage sale, when a girl named Jessica comes up trying to buy some of the cards off of them, which the kids aren't too keen on selling to her for some reason, eventually being forced to and relent to selling it for a much cheaper price than they initially wanted. We then go back to Jessica's room, which is apparently filled with a bunch of investment stuff, as well as this photo of some gorillas. Her brother walks in asking to borrow some money to help buy a gift for their parents' anniversary, offering to instead give him a high-interest loan, which he obviously denies. Their mom then walks in to ask Jessica to clean the attic, which she is forced to do if she wants to keep her weekly allowance, and she's a little money-hungry goblin, so of course she doesn't. As she's sweeping the attic, she stumbles across a small version of the man we saw at the beginning of the episode as he resides in the miniature Carlsville. After discussing with her mom about selling the little town, Jessica is left alone when she hears a phone ringing, realizing it's coming from a small phone booth in the city, which upon touching, she is shrunken down and transported into the town, answering the phone to talk to the man himself, Carl of Carlsville, who somehow knows her name and has invited her to explore the town to invest in a new opportunity. After walking around a bit, she runs into Carl as he's looking for a new business partner to help make some money, asking her to start working at a lemonade stand as a start, alongside its employee, a young boy named Nicky. To drive an increase in sales, Carl cranks up the heat in the town, and as they start to get customers, Jessica starts to overcharge for the lemonade as well as reduce the amount of it being sold, and even watering it down eventually. Also worth mentioning is we get like a nice little montage with a banger song in the background of some lemonade being sold. As the townspeople demand more lemonade, Jessica hides it to increase demand and announces that there's only one glass left, offering to sell it to the highest bidder. But the townspeople find out that she has more and realize that she's been ripping them off, causing her to transform into a greedy little pig, as they put it. The townspeople then chase her around at the request of Carl before she throws their money back at them, going inside a phone booth to call her own cell phone as the mob is distracted by the money. Thankfully, her brother is able to pick up, and upon doing so, Jessica gets teleported back to the real world, throwing out the miniature town and giving her brother $50 to make sure he doesn't take it back. That night, however, the two kids from the beginning of the episode find it near the trash, and so take Carlsville for themselves. This episode was pretty good. Obviously, we have a bit more to go till we see the whole story, but the plot is a relatively straightforward tale about not being greedy. That being said, I hesitate to give it anything near a perfect score, as much of the episode is just spent selling lemonade and talking about finance, which might be boring to some people. Good but not perfect. I'm gonna go with a 7.5 out of 10.
Take me out to the ball game. Take me out with the crowd.
So we pick up here where the last episode left off, this time with our buddy Matthew getting ready for baseball practice, and in his room we see Carlsville just chilling on one of his tables. At the baseball game, Matthew is doing what he usually does, which is sitting on the bench, unfortunately, when the other team's coach demands that he plays as he hasn't played all game per community rules. So Matthew finally gets a shot to hit, and unfortunately strikes out. Back home, Matthew sits disappointed in his room, tossing a baseball around when it suddenly becomes small and flies into Carlsville. Matthew attempts to grab the tiny ball, and when he does, is transported into Carlsville, and there, Carl asks Matthew to play for his team to a seemingly invisible but very loud crowd, with Carl being not only the announcer, but the singer for the Carlsville national anthem. During the game, there are still no visible players on the field, with Matthew being the first up to bat against a pitching machine. Although he strikes out the first two pitches, the last pitch stops midair for him to be able to hit the ball, allowing him to run to first base, except the base is running away from him, so a little different than regular baseball, but he's eventually able to outsmart it by turning around and pouncing on it. The next three bases aren't much easier, with him having his feet tied to the first base, him having to cross to the next base across lava, and eventually having to face down two monster players and a possessed baseball, but he is eventually able to get to home base, which takes him home as you might expect. When he does get back, Jessica comes over to talk to him about some baseball cards and realizes he has Carlsville. Matthew's little brother Todd receives a letter in the mail saying he won a sweepstake that needs to be redeemed in Carlsville, and upon dropping it in Carlsville, he is transported into the town. This part of the trilogy is pretty fun, I can't lie. Carl is cranked up to 11 here to be this sort of absurd, omnipotent being that has multiple forms that make him an interesting antagonist, and in my opinion, one of the best in the series. The plot itself is pretty straightforward and isn't anything too crazy, but it is definitely enjoyable, so I'll give this one an 8 out of 10. We pick right back off where we left as Todd has been transported into Carlsville, where they're having a parade to celebrate him as their grand prize winner. Back in the real world, Jessica and Matthew realize Todd must have been sucked in, so they desperately try to find a way to get back to him. After giving a speech, Todd is taken downstairs to a lab with Carl, as well as a bunch of creepy-looking plastic people who plan to make Todd a permanent citizen of Carlsville by making him into a plastic doll. Matthew and Jessica are able to make it into Carlsville by adjusting the population count to include 2 more, and once they're in, they look around for Todd, hoping to rescue him. The next few minutes is spent essentially essentially killing time as Jessica and Matthew look to find him, and once they do, they're eventually able to unplug the plasticinator ray, causing Carl in the town in return to run after them until Matthew and Todd's mom accidentally vacuums over the playset, sucking up everyone and releasing the kids back into the real world. To make sure this doesn't happen again, the kids burn the set in their fireplace, but in the final shot, Carl comes tumbling out of the vacuum, meaning Carlsville still has a chance of coming back. This episode was unfortunately probably the weakest in the trio, which is a disappointment, and this is mainly due to the long time spent just waiting for Todd to be rescued by the other two kids. It felt very forced and dragged out, but overall I'd say that the episode was still enjoyable in the same way that the other two episodes were. So yeah, with everything in mind, I think I'll give this one a 6 out of 10, and overall I think the trilogy episodes were pretty good.
I wanna be teacher's pet.
This episode starts off with a group of kids taking a hike through the woods with their teacher when one of them realizes she lost her necklace, so her and another boy in the group double back to go look for it. While they're looking for it, the girl named Becca ends up finding it, as well as a little bunny, except when she picks up the bunny and turns it around, it has the face of a lizard. When Becca tells her teacher what she saw, the teacher and the class laugh at her because, you know, she's a dumb, stupid idiot, and so with the group back together, they head to a presentation by one of the area's wildlife experts. During the presentation, the wildlife expert guy brings out a snake and feeds it a mouse to show how it hunts in the wild, and also just generally gives off a very creepy vibe. The class is then assigned to explore the woods to look for examples of like the food chain in action or something like that, and while our two main characters are exploring, they find a seemingly abandoned cabin. In the cabin, they find what looks to be a lab that has a collection of things like snake skins and worms and all that sort of thing. While they're in the cabin, they get cornered by like a big old snake, probably the same boa they used earlier for this episode, which like, they can just leave. These snakes aren't even dangerous to humans really, but to get out of it, they instead sacrifice a poor gerbil from one of the enclosures. They're eventually able to get away and run into their classmates that laugh at them because it's just a fucking snake, dude. Like, why are you so scared? Anyways, the class ends up camping in the woods that night when Becca wakes up to explore the cabin again for some reason, bringing her friend Benji, which, hey, that's my dog's name, to explore it. In one of the dressers, they find the DNA of a bunch of different animals, or something similar to that, I guess, but are interrupted by the wildlife guy from earlier who has been crossbreeding animals, I guess, and oh no, he's actually a snake-human hybrid, and so he turns into the snake from earlier that was chasing them and then attacks them. To escape, Becca throws like some sort of DNA or acid of like fruit flies on the snake, causing it to instantly shed its skin for some reason, and apparently because this covered him in like fruit fly DNA, it turns him into a man-eating fruit fly. Also, before the credits, we get a memorial message for the actor Becca, who apparently died from meningitis at only 16, which is just sad, really. So just know that the criticisms I'm about to launch at this episode are in no way directed at her. With that being said, holy fuck is this episode boring. The entire episode is just walking around the woods with the characters scared of some animal, rinse repeat until it's over. The main threat of this episode is also so easily defeated not once but twice, so he really doesn't feel like the giant threat the episode makes him out to be. All in all, I wish it was better, but I'm gonna have to give this one a 1 out of 10. And now we have cracked into the final season. This episode starts off with a young boy named Mark having the doorbell ring in the middle of the night, but when he answers it, no one is there, and instead there's a package that apparently has come from his Aunt Benna from the jungle of Balladora, which I looked it up, not a real place. The boy takes the box back to his room, which is very safari/jungle inspired, I guess, placing it on his bed when the box starts viciously rattling, and when he turns around, it seems like something has broken out of the box and is now jumping around in his room. With spear in hand, he checks under his bed to find a possessed shrunken head which starts floating towards him, and when his mom and her date come to check on him, it suddenly stops, scaring off his mom's prospective partner. The following morning, him and his mom get a call from his Aunt Benna, the one who sent him the head, asking him to come visit the island of Balladora. His mom says yes, and upon getting there, he's greeted by an Elvis impersonator who is also his pilot, I guess, coming to get him to take him to his aunt's camp. During the ride, the plane starts to go down, but miraculously, the shrunken head seemingly saves them after it says Mark's made-up word, Kalia, causing Mark to chant it and the plane to be saved. When the two land, they're greeted by a girl named Kareen who seemingly hates living there, and for whatever reason, almost everyone at the camp is wearing a white outfit with round sunglasses and keeps creepily staring at Mark. Kareen then leads Mark to her parents, Dr. Hollins and Dr. Hollins, a pair of doctors who tell Mark that his aunt has gone missing. In the middle of the night, Mark has like a nightmare vision about his aunt as well as a Spider-Man. No, not that one. This one. When he wakes up from a nightmare, the shrunken head starts floating and leads him towards a locker in one of the tents with a TV and VHS recording of his aunt. On the VHS recording, his aunt talks about some magic word, but Mark is interrupted by male Dr. Hollins and overhears him on the phone discussing wanting to get rid of his aunt as well as using Mark as a hostage. Mark tries to run and grab help from one of the workers, but he responds by growling at him, picking him up, and making his eyes glow white. Male Dr. Hollins then explains a convoluted explanation of events that boils down to Mark's aunt discovering an ancient magic, turning the workers into mindless zombies, with the magic corrupting her mind, and then using a computer of his aunt's voice to convince him to come here as a bargaining chip for his aunt to stop using the magic. The next morning, Kareen goes to get Mark, but discovers he's gone, having gone into the jungle after not believing male Dr. Hollins' story, but ends up falling into quicksand a few seconds later and is found by Kareen, who is unsuccessful in saving him. But don't worry, his shrunken head starts glowing, and upon saying his magic word, Mark is grabbed by a vine and pulled up from the quicksand. To gain Mark's trust, Kareen explains that her dad and her mom are actually the evil ones, and turns the workers there into mindless zombie people after being unsuccessful in using the magic his aunt found. The pair then follow the shrunken head, who leads them to Aunt Benna, and after talking with his aunt for a bit, Kareen reveals herself to be a bit of a backstabber and was followed closely behind by her parents. To try to get information out of his aunt, they hang Mark over a vat of acid that will apparently shrink his head. His aunt refuses to tell them about the magic, but instead tells Mark to remember his 8th birthday, which, with a flashback, he's able to remember that she's imbued him with magic and that he can use the magic Kalia word, and once he does, he starts floating and the workers turn on the Hollins, forcing them into an acid bath. Because the magic is too powerful and could be abused, his aunt uses a special coin to make him forget. And we then cut back to a later time where Mark is telling a story about how all of this happened to his mom's boyfriend from the beginning. And finally, after his mom and her boyfriend leave, in one of the drawers we see Mark is keeping the shrunken Holland family in a terrarium. This episode was pretty solid, I'd say. Not my favorite of the two-parter episodes, but I still thought it was relatively interesting, with my favorite character easily being the Elvis impersonator Jimmy. Overall, it's a good episode. I didn't connect with it as much as others, but I'm gonna give this one an 8 out of 10. Could have used more Jimmy. This episode starts off with our protagonist Hannah home alone at night writing a letter to her friend when she's suddenly interrupted by a weird voice as well as a rock through her window. Understandably, she tries to call the police, but for some reason the operator on the other end can't hear her, so she does the next best thing that she can think of, leaving her house and going straight towards the danger. She's then surprised and greeted by her apparent new neighbor Danny, who lives in an old abandoned house next door, who offers to help her find what made the noise, but instead uses the opportunity to jump out and scare her. After talking for a bit and showing her a pretty neat magic trick, the door of the abandoned house opens by itself, causing him to leave abruptly. The next day, while Hannah is writing a letter to her friend, she overhears the mailman outside while she's writing, causing her to run outside, barely missing the mailman. As the mailman drives away, her new buddy Danny gets smacked by the car, leaving this weird black imprint on the ground. Also, the mailman just kind of drives off after this, which I think might be called a hit and run. Later that day, she goes over to investigate Danny's house when he pops up out of nowhere and refuses to let her in, instead wanting to show her something else and running off ahead to a storm bunker, I guess is what you might call this. From this bunker, Hannah starts hearing a voice calling her name, so she goes down to investigate, thinking it's Danny messing with her. However, she gets down there and there's a bunch of spooky stuff happening, causing her to run up and be greeted by Danny, who seemingly was never down there. This causes her to accuse him of being a ghost, which I'm not sure how she came to that conclusion with what we were given, but alright. Back at home, Hannah goes to do some good old interweb surfing and ends up finding a story about a family who died in a house fire nearby, so she goes to investigate Danny's house again. When she gets in there, it's a bit creepy with a lot of candle lighting, and when she tries to talk to Danny's mom, she ignores her, making her think something is off. But surprise, Danny shows up and is like, "Hey dickhead, why are you in my house? Also, my mom is deaf." As she's leaving, she apologizes for thinking he's a ghost, showing him the article of the burned house she printed off when Danny realizes her house is actually the one that burned down, and when they go to look at it, it's all overgrown and creepy looking. Hannah, in disbelief, tries to push through him and instead walks through him, so I guess she's the ghost, but I just don't understand how she didn't realize that the address was hers. Anyways, Danny gets kind of freaked out by this, so he runs off, and now when Hannah goes into the house, everything is charred and she can't interact with certain objects. While she's exploring the house, she's confronted by the weird shadow thing that keeps following her, saying that he was trying to let her know that she was a ghost, and now that she's realized, the illusion of her day-to-day life has been broken, and instead offers to teach her how to become a ghost. Scared, Hannah runs over to see Danny for help, who is freaked out and doesn't want to see her, next to his mom, who straight up can't see her. Frustrated, she leaves and accepts help from the shadow guy, who teaches her how to interact with real-life objects and how to haunt the mailman. But afterwards, she decides that she doesn't want to just spend her afterlife pranking people. We then cut back to Danny riding around on his bike with his friends, telling them about the ghost, and says he'll ask her to do something to prove she's real. Danny goes inside the house to get Hannah, as well as to apologize, when the creepy shadow guy tries to crush Danny with a piece of the ceiling, so Hannah rushes to push him out of the way. They end up making up, but Hannah refuses to do stuff for Danny's friends and asks him to leave. The shadow dude then reveals that the only reason Danny can see her is that he is destined to die, and by midnight tonight, he will die, finally giving the shadow man a ghost form to use. Back at Danny's, his shitty friends are thinking about kicking him out of their friend group, but give him one more shot to prank the mailman by planting a stink bomb in his house. So the boys set off to do just that. Back in Hannah, she realizes that the shadow dude is trying to just kill Danny and he's not really destined to die at all. So she goes to make it her new purpose to save him. So she heads to Danny's and finds that he's headed to the mailman's place. Back with Danny, he breaks into the mailman's place to light the stink bomb off, but accidentally burns himself, dropping the match and breaking a lamp, waking up the mailman. He runs to hide in a closet, and when the mailman goes downstairs to investigate the noise, he realizes it must have just been his cat and shuts the closet Danny's in on the way up. Now stuck in the closet, the match Danny dropped quickly catches the house on fire, leaving Danny trapped inside. Hannah gets there and rushes inside to find Danny, able to open the door, but when she does, Danny is passed out from smoke inhalation and isn't strong enough to pick him up. To try to get someone's attention, she starts playing the piano in the house, and so the mailman rushes in to save Danny. Back outside, Hannah confronts the Shadow Man as it is now past midnight, sending him back to the Shadow Realm. And now with her job done, Danny can no longer see Hannah, so Hannah disappears, rejoining with her family in the afterlife. So yeah, this episode was pretty great, some serious themes here, and not gonna lie, I was not expecting the twist. They really set Danny up pretty well here to be the ghost. Overall, I really liked this episode, and although at times I felt that the pacing was maybe a bit slow, the strong ending really pulled through, and for that reason, I feel like I'd just be nitpicky if I didn't give this episode a 10 out of 10. This episode starts off with a creepy man in a hat walking up to a door in the middle of the night, and this door is then opened by two kids, Allison and Ryan, and the man is revealed to be the pet exorcist by the name of Dr. Mason. Fun fact, Allison here is played by the same girl who played Iris in Calling All Creeps, but anyways. A few weeks prior, the kid's cat was ran over, and since then, they've had some weird experiences with the spirit of the cat. Dr. Mason then goes into Fluffy's favorite old room with a bottle of catnip before getting mauled, I guess. And when Ryan goes up to the door to investigate, he gets grabbed by a giant set of claws that end up popping off to reveal it to be an animatronic, because it's actually a movie set. None of this was real. From here, it's revealed that the two kids are actually kind of assholes and go to bitch to their agents about the movie. Frustrated over having to do the film, Allison goes out on a bike ride to practice her lines before running over somebody's cat with her bike. Anyway, she goes to the creepiest but closest house nearby and just invites herself inside, greeted by a girl named Crystal who says that was her cat named Rip, and that Rip isn't like ordinary cats and that her mom will likely be very upset. So she forces Allison to leave, saying she's happy that the cat is gone, I guess. Allison gets back to set, and when she drinks her water, it has cat hair in it, so naturally she thinks her co-star put cat hair in her water and pours it all over him. Once they start filming, they go through the scene when unexpectedly at the end of the scene, a scary cat-looking thing, which appears to be Rip apparently, pops out of a cabinet scaring Allison. Despite filming this, no one else seems to have seen the cat, so they just kind of think she's crazy. Back in her dressing room, she finds that her room has been totaled, and after a bit of time cleaning stuff up, she overhears the director talking about firing her. Right after this, Rip pops up through her bedsheets, and in response, she throws that bitch out the window, finding it in the parking lot before it scratches her, giving her a radioactive-looking injury on her arm that magically disappears, which apparently causes her to start acting like a cat involuntarily. This eventually leads to her leaping off the roof in one of the set pieces, and miraculously, they take her to the hospital and she sustained no broken bones. However, they knock her out just to let her get some rest after her weird actions make them think she suffered from some sort of psychotic break. In the middle of the night at the hospital, Rip breaks into her room but magically disappears, I guess. Allison then breaks out of the room and then overhears the doctor saying that Allison's blood was tested and came back as cat blood, meaning that she's somehow turned into a cat. To help resolve this, Allison goes back to that creepy old house that Crystal lives in to try to get some help. Crystal tells her that Rip is able to keep getting 9 lives by scratching people to get their life force and in turn putting some of his life force into them. I don't know how the math works on that. I feel like that would kind of cancel out, but apparently he is on life number 8 and is desperate to keep living. Crystal then tells Allison that she first buried him at the local cemetery, so she thinks he might be there. The only issue is that the directors are shooting a scene at the cemetery that night. At the cemetery, they've replaced Allison and are now shooting the cemetery scene, accidentally digging up Rip's grave. Allison pulls up and tries to stop things when everyone laughs at her and security restrains her. As they're shooting the grave digging scene, they realize that the coffin isn't the correct one from the movie, and they've actually digged up Rip's casket, which causes a massive earthquake and explosion as he's now a giant Rip cat, I guess, back from the dead. Allison and Ryan run to Crystal's house, who lets them inside to talk to her mom, who is effectively a cat woman after letting Rip scratch her too many times, and instead of helping, she pretty much just invites Rip to scratch Allison and Ryan. To get out of the situation, Allison uses a mouse toy she conveniently has in her pocket, as well as a conveniently placed random chemical that Crystal's mom had in her lab, using this to trick Rip into eating the mouse toy and blowing him up, but not before Rip is able to scratch Ryan. But now that Rip is dead, Crystal's mom turns back to normal, but oh no, at the end, Ryan is somehow infected and eats a rat at the end. The plot twist at the end here really didn't make all that much sense. Like, if Ryan got scratched but Rip is now dead, how is he still possessed or whatever by Rip, but Crystal's mom is fine now? Outside of this plot point, I feel that this episode was still relatively good, mainly due to how the characters are written. 90% of the roles here just involve being an over-the-top parody of people working in the entertainment industry, which kept it, at the very least, entertaining. I don't know, I'm gonna give this one a 6 out of 10. We made it, folks. The final episode in the series. Let's get this wrapped up. All right, so this one starts off with a young kid named Sheena. Is that like the female version of Sheen? Anyways, she's fishing in a boat, and oh no, she's getting attacked by a shark, but it's actually her brother Billy with a remote control shark fin playing what me and the boys might call an epic prank. However, when they get to the shore, they find a shark tooth, so they start running back to their Uncle Harold's house, who's like a marine scientist or whatever. When they get back to the house, though, they can't find Uncle Harold, but instead find a trail of goo leading outside, but are unable to find anything. The two siblings then go look for their Uncle Harold down in the basement, aka his science lab, where they uselessly wrestle for a random chemical he has and spill it into a tank with an anglerfish that grows super large and starts shooting spikes at them. They take cover from these spikes in the closet before Uncle Harold and his friend Ritter come in and save the day. After this, the kids get a stern talking to for going in the lab, like, you're not supposed to be there, and then they get told to stay away from the water, which is a rule Billy immediately breaks, and Rutrow, he finds a guy dying near the water and repeatedly saying something about Lady Milton. Billy goes to grab his uncle and his friend to bring the guy back to the house so they can help the poor dude out, all while the housekeeper lady they have just kind of looks at them suspiciously. The guy eventually starts mumbling again about Lady Milton and an island, so the gang all team up to go to the island to find the missing Lady Milton, while the housekeeper is tasked with calling the ambulance, but the phone line is dead, I guess, so she just can't do anything. Once they get to the island, Harold's friend Ritter abandons them on the island because apparently Harold doesn't have the balls to pursue their dangerous experiment. Now stuck on the island, Harold explains that the experiment that they worked on allowed a plant to produce 4 times the amount of oxygen for the same amount of CO2, but had the side effect of making things grow very large. And somehow it got into the lake and the fish started eating it, so now things are kind of fucked. After finding a wrecked ship, while his uncle and sister look for a backup life raft in the wreckage, Billy sees something moving in the tree line and calls for help, which they can't hear for some reason, I guess, so he just decides to follow it alone. Sheena is eventually able to find a handmade kayak hidden under some plants, while Billy finds the goo from earlier and gets kidnapped by some creature. Uncle Harold and Sheena hear Billy scream, so they go chase after him before having to flee as the island is infested with giant monsters, so I guess Goosebumps kind of did like a King Kong Skull Island episode. After being chased, they're forced to hide from a giant CGI iguana before Uncle Harold is pulled underground by a weird reptile hand. Sheena chases after her uncle, falling down into an underground cave system inhabited by giant animals. And then in the cave, Billy pops up out of nowhere and the two siblings run into one of their uncle's missing lab assistants, Louise, who after being bribed by Dr. Ritter to take the experimental chemical, turned into some weird octopus man thing. Louise explains that there are other fish people affected by the chemical stuff who blame Uncle Harold for the side effects of the stuff, which is why they've kidnapped him. The trio find Uncle Harold, who is about to be sacrificed to a giant green screen spider, but Sheena and Billy reason them out of it, and instead they decide to go after Dr. Ritter. We then cut forward in time, and Louise is no longer an octopus man after Dr. Harold was able to create an antidote and reverse everything. As for Dr. Ritter, well, he was turned into a fish man and is now being showed off as a freak show attraction at a carnival tent owned by the housekeeper lady. Alright, the final episode. What to give this one? It's tough to say. I do enjoy some aspects of it. There's a lot of mystery going on, lots of red herrings to throw the viewer off, keep things interesting. That being said, I'm not sure why everyone else grows big from this stuff, but humans just turn into fish people. Doesn't make all that much sense, but then again, not a lot of stuff in Goosebumps really does. I still find it enjoyable. I'm going to give it a 7.5 out of 10. And I think that means we're finally done. So how does Goosebumps hold up as an adult? Well, not very well. Some of these episodes are pretty great and have a good story, but many of them definitely feel like a low-budget kids show with a mix of quality in the storytelling. But honestly, despite it being pretty much all I watched these past few weeks, I did find it enjoyable to go back and revisit a classic that I enjoyed so much as a kid. This video took a little bit of time to work on. Editing and even reading this felt like a Herculean task, but we did it. And I did it for you. I definitely did not do it for the money. Speaking of money, I'd like to give a special thanks to this month's patrons. Mads, Dave the Unknown, Griff, Einar Anderson, Turmeric, Maddie Grady, Charles Dunking, Kenny, and Daddy Yam. Thank you for your support. It really does mean a lot. And of course, thank you to everyone else for watching. I'm surprised people even watch this junk. It amazes me every day. That being said, this junk takes quite a bit of work, so I'm going to end it here and give my voice a fucking rest. Thank you all. And until next time, take care.